The crystal glass hit the marble floor with a sickening crack, but the damage was already done. Red wine dripped down my face, staining my white silk blouse and the contract I'd refused to sign just moments before. "You ungrateful bitch," Ethan hissed, his perfectly manicured hand still suspended in the air where the glass had been. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." All around us, Seattle's elite stood frozen in shock, cocktail conversations evaporating into stunned silence. Cameras flashed as someone captured the moment my marriage publicly shattered at the annual Barrett Foundation Gala. The moment that, ironically, would save me. I didn't know then that in exactly 72 hours, I would be driving down the Oregon coast with nothing but a suitcase and the company I'd nearly lost, heading toward a life I couldn't yet imagine. I didn't know that the Prenup activation code I would text from the ladies' room that night would set me free. But looking back, I realized the seeds of my liberation were planted long before the wine hit my face. 6 years earlier, I'd met Ethan Collins at a startup pitch competition in downtown Seattle. I was sweaty, nervous, and clutching a handmade prototype of my first skincare product, a face serum made from locally sourced ingredients that I'd perfected in my apartment kitchen. He was confident, immaculately dressed, and wielding a checkbook, as one of the competition's angel investor judges. I didn't win the competition that day, but as Ethan approached me afterward, eyes gleaming with interest in both me and my business concept, it felt like I'd won something better. "Your product has potential," he said, handing me his business card with his personal number scrawled on the back. "But your pitch needs work. Let me buy you coffee and explain why." That coffee turned into dinner, which turned into breakfast. Within 6 months, Pure Origins had secured its first round of funding, with Ethan as the primary investor, and I had secured a fiancé. The Seattle business journals called us the perfect merger of finance and innovation. Friends joked that I'd hit the jackpot, finding both a business angel and a life partner in one swoop. Even my parents, who had initially worried about the whirlwind romance, were won over by Ethan's charm and obvious financial security. Only my college roommate Zoe voiced any concern. "Just make sure you protect what's yours, Becca," she warned, over mimosas at my bachelorette party. "I've seen too many women lose themselves in relationships with powerful men." I laughed it off, but something in her words resonated enough that when Ethan's lawyer presented a prenuptial agreement 2 weeks before our wedding, I hired my own attorney to review it. That decision, adding a morality and ethics clause with specific asset protection triggers, would eventually save everything I'd built. The clause, buried on page 18 in careful legal language, established that any act of physical aggression or public humiliation would immediately freeze joint assets and reinstate my full ownership of Pure Origins. It included a specific text code I could send to simultaneously alert our lawyers and bank. Ethan had skimmed the addition and signed without comment. "It's just boilerplate," my lawyer had assured him. "Standard protection language that works both ways." In retrospect, his casual dismissal revealed how inconceivable it was to him that he might ever lose control. The first 3 years of our marriage unfolded like a success story. Pure Origins expanded from my kitchen experiments to a proper lab space and manufacturing facility. We moved from my modest apartment to a sleek downtown condo with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound. Ethan's investment connections opened doors I hadn't known existed, and soon my products were being featured in subscription boxes and boutique stores across the Pacific Northwest. I was invited to entrepreneurial panels as a rising star in the natural skincare industry. Ethan beamed proudly from the audience, always ready to network on my behalf afterward. But even as the business grew, subtle shifts occurred in our relationship. So, gradual, I barely noticed them happening. It started with suggestions. "You should consider hiring Ryan for your sales team," Ethan would say, referring to a former colleague of his. Or, That packaging looks amateur. My friend's design firm could help. Soon, suggestions evolved into expectations. I've already told the Williamsons you'll reformulate that moisturizer without the almond oil. Their daughter has allergies. The introduction itself is valuable currency. That evening, I entered Coastal Light Photography Gallery 15 minutes before closing time. Valerie, the former war photographer Lisa had pointed out at the cafe, looked up from her computer with professional assessment. "You must be Rebecca." Devin called about the market booth. Her directness reminded me of Eleanor's, though warmth animated her expression where Eleanor projected reserve. "Come see what you're working with." She led me to a back room where promotional displays and marketing materials for various local artisans were organized with gallery-worthy precision. "Community booth participants share this 8-foot table," she explained, showing measurements and layout options. "You'll need product samples, obviously, but equally important is visual storytelling, helping market visitors understand what distinguishes your approach." She gestured toward her own award-winning photographs of coastal landscapes. "People connect with authenticity and place. Your products use local ingredients, yes? Tell that story visually as well as verbally." For the next hour, Valerie offered practical guidance on display design, material selection, and visual storytelling techniques, professional expertise that would have cost thousands in consulting fees in Seattle, provided here through simple collegial generosity. When I tried to thank her, she shrugged. "Cedar Cove survives because we amplify each other's work. Your success potentially benefits my gallery visitors seeking local gifts, basic ecosystem functionality." The market preparation added intensity to days already filled with cafe shifts, co-op inventory, and formulation refinement. Lisa adjusted my schedule without complaint when I explained the opportunity. Alan at the co-op offered display materials, left from previous events. Iris provided pristine botanical samples to illustrate key ingredients. The Washingtons said little but expressed support through practical assistance, Marcus constructing a collapsible display shelf, Eleanor reviewing product descriptions for clarity and compliance with cosmetic regulations. 3 days before the DI market, I received an unexpected text from my Seattle lawyer. "Settlement conference scheduled next month. E's legal team proposing division of Pure Origins IP and market territories. Clearly recognizes brand value. Need your position on acceptable terms." The message yanked me back into the reality I'd been gradually reshaping. The legal proceedings continuing in my absence, Ethan's strategic maneuvering, decisions required about the business incarnation I'd built before Cedar Cove. The timing created a clarifying moment. The original Pure Origins represented significant value: established market presence, customer loyalty, distribution relationships. A reasonable settlement might include substantial financial compensation and retained rights to certain product lines. The pragmatic business decision would be strategic compromise, securing assets while minimizing ongoing conflict. Yet something in me balked at the thought of Ethan controlling any aspect of what I'd created, of seeing products I'd formulated marketed under his influence. I found myself walking along the shoreline that evening, watching waves reshape the beach with each advancing and retreating cycle. The natural rhythm suggested a different approach to conflict resolution, not rigid defense of territory, but fluid adaptation to changing conditions. Perhaps the answer wasn't fighting to preserve pre-Ethan Pure Origins intact, but allowing that business incarnation to conclude its natural cycle while focusing energy on the new growth already emerging in Cedar Cove. My response to my lawyer reflected this shift in perspective. Not interested in divided territories or shared IP. Prefer clean break. Will surrender Seattle formulations and brand applications in exchange for full ownership of all new developments and financial compensation for established value. Draft settlement on these terms. I'm building something new. The decision felt simultaneously like surrender and liberation. acknowledging real losses while refusing to remain tethered to battle lines drawn in the past. The morning of the artisan market dawned with coastal fog that gradually yielded to brilliant sunshine, weather that mirrored my own emotional state as I transported carefully prepared samples and display materials to the town square. The event occupied the heart of Cedar Cove, with established artisans in individual tents surrounding a central community pavilion hosting newer ventures. Valerie efficiently directed setup of the shared table, positioning Pure Origins, coastal, resilience between a honeycomb candlemaker and a driftwood jewelry artisan. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Then came insertions into my decision-making process. I've scheduled a meeting with potential investors on Thursday. They're interested in funding a major expansion. When I pointed out that I hadn't been planning an expansion quite yet, his expression would darken. "You need to think bigger, Rebecca. I'm just helping you see the potential you're missing." The tipping point came during a dinner with Ethan's business associates at our condo. While pouring wine, Ethan casually mentioned, "We're thinking of rebranding Pure Origins to Collins Natural next quarter, something more family-oriented as we scale nationally." The glass in my hand froze halfway to my lips. This was the first I'd heard of any rebranding, let alone a name that erased my creation and replaced it with his family name. Later that night, after everyone had left, I confronted him. "Pure Origins is my company, Ethan. I founded it before I met you. I never agreed to change the name." He looked genuinely confused by my objection. "But we're a family now, Rebecca. I've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars. My connections have built this company as much as your formulas have." When I reminded him that his investment had been structured as loans with favorable terms, not ownership stakes, his expression hardened into something I'd never seen before. "Do you really think you'd be anywhere without me? You were mixing oils in mason jars when I found you." That night, I slept in the guest room, telling myself it was just a miscommunication, that Ethan's pride was hurt, that we would find a compromise in the morning. Instead, over breakfast, he placed a folder in front of me. Inside was paperwork to add his name to the business registration as co-owner and to authorize the name change to Collins Natural. "Just a formality," he said, sliding an expensive pen across our marble island. "We're partners in everything else. It's time to make it official with Pure Origins, too." Something cold settled in my stomach as I stared at the documents. This wasn't a negotiation or a request. It was an expectation, one that had apparently been in the works for some time, given the professionally prepared paperwork. "I need time to think about this," I said, closing the folder without signing. "And to consult with my business attorney." Ethan's smile remained fixed, but his eyes flashed with something dangerous. "Don't be difficult, Becca. This is happening. The only question is whether you'll be reasonable about it." For the next 2 weeks, an Arctic chill descended over our relationship. Ethan worked late, responding to my texts with one-word answers. When home, he was polite but distant, like we were strangers sharing an elevator rather than a marriage. The unsigned folder remained on his desk, a silent accusation. Meanwhile, I discovered other concerning developments. Ethan had been meeting with our biggest retail partners, positioning himself as the business development arm of Pure Origins. He'd had preliminary conversations with packaging suppliers about the rebrand. Most alarmingly, I found emails suggesting he'd been exploring ways to leverage his initial investment to claim controlling interest, consulting with his attorney about options if I proved difficult. I scheduled an urgent meeting with my own lawyer, the same one who had reviewed our prenup. As I laid out the situation, her expression grew increasingly grave. "He's trying to execute a hostile takeover of your company," she said bluntly. "The fact that you're married makes it complicated, but not impossible to fight. However, I should warn you, these situations often get messy." "Messier than my marriage already is?" I asked, attempting humor that fell flat against the reality of my situation. She slid a business card across her desk. "This is a good family lawyer. You might need her soon. In the meantime, don't sign anything. And Rebecca, document everything." The Barrett Foundation Gala had been on our calendar for months. As major donors to Seattle's arts community, the Barretts hosted an annual black tie fundraiser that doubled as a networking powerhouse for the city's business elite. Canceling would have been conspicuous, raising questions neither Ethan nor I wanted to address publicly while our private power struggle continued. So I zipped myself into a black evening gown, clasped my grandmother's pearls around my neck, and prepared to spend an evening pretending that my marriage and business weren't simultaneously imploding. The tension between us had reached fever pitch that morning when I discovered Ethan had scheduled a meeting with Pure Origin's legal team without including me. "Just cleaning up some intellectual property questions," he'd claimed dismissively when confronted. The Barrett mansion was ablaze with lights as we arrived, camera flashes popping as Seattle's wealthy and connected strolled the red carpet. Ethan placed his hand on the small of my back, the picture of the devoted husband. "Smile," he whispered through gritted teeth. "Everyone who matters in this city is watching." For 2 hours, we circulated separately through the crowd, each playing our public roles flawlessly while avoiding direct interaction. I was deep in conversation with a potential retail partner when Ethan appeared at my side. Too bright smile fixed in place, champagne flute in one hand and a familiar folder in the other. "Perfect timing," he said smoothly. "I was just telling Charles here about our exciting rebranding plans." He placed the folder on a nearby high-top table and opened it to reveal the same ownership transfer documents I'd refused to sign weeks earlier. A fountain pen appeared in his hand. "Shall we make it official? Charles is a notary, conveniently enough." The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Refuse in front of Charles, who oversaw purchasing for the largest luxury retailer in the Pacific Northwest, and I'd appear unprofessional, potentially jeopardizing a crucial business relationship. Sign, and I'd surrender everything I'd built. The calculation in Ethan's eyes was clear. He believed I would choose temporary harmony over conflict. "This isn't the time or place for business decisions, honey," I said, maintaining my smile while closing the folder. "We can discuss this at home." Ethan's hand closed over mine, his grip just tight enough to communicate his anger while appearing affectionate to onlookers. "No more delays, Rebecca. You're being childish about this. The documents are ready, Charles is here, and this partnership announcement would make an excellent addition to the evening's good news." Charles looked between us, professional smile faltering as he sensed the undercurrent of tension. "I'm happy to step away if this is a bad time," he offered. "It's a perfect time," Ethan insisted, reopening the folder and pressing the pen into my hand. "Rebecca just needs a little encouragement to overcome her fear of growth. Don't you, darling?" Something snapped inside me. The accumulated weight of months of manipulation, weeks of bullying, and the sudden clarity that this man never saw me as a partner at all, but as an acquisition to be managed. I placed the pen down deliberately and looked Ethan directly in the eyes. "I will never add your name to my company. Pure Origins is mine. It stays mine. And if you try to take it from me, I will fight you with everything I have." For a moment, genuine shock registered on Ethan's face. The shock of a man who has never been denied something he felt entitled to. Then his features contorted with rage. It happened so quickly that I had no time to react. His arm swung upward, the red wine in his glass arcing through the air before splashing across my face, soaking my hair, dripping down onto my dress and the contract below. The sound of shattering crystal as he slammed the empty glass down punctuated the sudden silence that rippled outward from our corner of the gala. "You ungrateful bitch," Ethan hissed, his voice carrying in the shocked quiet. "After everything I've done for you." Countless eyes turned in our direction. Somewhere, a camera flashed. Charles backed away, hand covering his mouth. For one suspended moment, humiliation burned hotter than anger as wine dripped from my chin onto the marble floor. Then, with surprising steadiness, I picked up my clutch and walked toward the ladies' room, head high despite the stares and whispers that followed. Inside, I locked myself in a stall, hands shaking as I withdrew my phone. With trembling fingers, I typed the code phrase and sent it to the number my lawyer had established years earlier. Red sky warning. 3 simple words that would freeze our joint assets, alert my legal team, and activate the protective clause in our prenuptial agreement. As I blotted wine from my silk blouse with dampened paper towels, the gravity of what had just occurred, and what would follow, settled over me. My marriage was over. The careful life I'd constructed in Seattle was shattered. But strangely, beneath the shock and grief, another emotion bubbled up. Relief. The pretense was finally over. Ethan had shown his true nature in front of witnesses. There would be no more gaslighting, no more pretending that his attempts to control my business were for my own good. As I stared at my wine-stained reflection, a plan began forming. I had built Pure Origins from nothing once before. I could do it again, somewhere new, somewhere beyond Ethan's influence. 3 days later, after a flurry of emergency meetings, with attorneys and bankers, I packed a single suitcase into my car. My lawyer had worked miracles, leveraging the public nature of Ethan's outburst and the clearly documented history of his attempts to seize control of Pure Origins. The prenup's morality clause had performed exactly as designed, protecting my business assets while temporarily freezing everything else pending further legal proceedings. I had enough liquid funds to start over and the freedom to take my company, wherever I chose. As Seattle's skyline shrunk in my rearview mirror, I pointed my car south toward the Oregon coast, toward a small artistic community called Cedar Cove, where an old college friend had once mentioned affordable commercial space and a community that valued handmade, local products. I had no idea then that this hasty escape would lead me to a converted boathouse studio overlooking a windswept bay. I couldn't have imagined that I would find mentors in Eleanor and Marcus Washington, my retired neighbors who had escaped the corporate legal world themselves decades earlier. I didn't know that Cedar Cove's community of artisans would embrace both me and a reimagined Pure Origins, or that the local lavender and seaweed would inspire an entirely new product line that would eventually outperform anything I'd created in Seattle. All I knew, as I crossed the state line with tears and determination competing for dominance, was that for the first time in years, every decision about my future was truly mine to make. The road stretched before me, uncertain but full of possibility. The smell of wine still lingered in my hair, a final gift from the man who had tried to own me, the man who had instead set me free. The Oregon coastline unfurled before me like a promise, all misty cliffs and churning waves that seemed to embody the tumult in my own heart. My knuckles had turned white from gripping the steering wheel for the past 6 hours, as if holding on might somehow keep me from flying apart. The radio had long since faded to static, leaving me alone with thoughts that pinballed between panic and a strange, unfamiliar exhilaration. Twice I'd pulled over at rest stops, overtaken by waves of doubt so powerful they made my stomach heave. Both times, my phone had lit up with Ethan's name, the coincidence feeling almost supernatural until I remembered the tracking app he'd insisted we both install for safety. I deleted the app in a gas station bathroom outside Portland, along with my social media accounts and email addresses that Ethan knew. My lawyer had advised creating this digital distance, explaining that men like Ethan rarely surrendered control willingly. "He'll try to pull you back into his orbit," she'd warned during our hurried meeting the morning after the gala. "The prenup protects your assets, but it can't protect your resolve." She'd slid a burner phone across her desk along with a list of recommended steps for someone leaving an increasingly controlling relationship. The clinical nature of that list — change banks, use cash when possible, vary your routine, had made the reality of my situation impossible to deny. I wasn't just leaving a failed marriage, I was escaping. The Welcome to Cedar Cove sign appeared through a curtain of afternoon mist, faded blue paint peeling around carved wooden letters. Population 3,542. The number struck me as impossibly small after Seattle's bustling millions. What had Zoe told me about this place? That artists were drawn to the light, that rent was reasonable, that the community valued craftsmanship over commerce. It had sounded charming when she'd mentioned it years ago during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. Now, as I navigated narrow streets lined with weathered clapboard buildings, it looked like either salvation or a terrible mistake. The Driftwood Inn sat perched on a bluff overlooking the bay, a rambling two-story structure that had clearly been cobbled together through multiple additions over decades. The vacancy sign flickered erratically in the gathering dusk. Inside, a woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a loose bun looked up from her crossword puzzle, assessing me with kind but shrewd eyes. "Rough day?" she asked, taking in my rumpled clothes and the hollowness I could feel around my eyes. I managed a weak smile. "Rough week." Something in her expression softened. She introduced herself as Maggie, slid a registration card across the worn wooden counter, and then hesitated before asking for ID. When I fumbled with my wallet, hands still unsteady, she waved it away. "The card's enough for tonight. You look like you could use rest more than paperwork." My room featured faded floral wallpaper, a brass bed that creaked with every movement, and windows that faced the churning Pacific. I stood watching the waves until darkness swallowed them, feeling untethered from the life I'd left behind. The woman I'd been just days ago, Becca Collins, wife of investment banker Ethan Collins, owner of a promising skincare startup, seemed like a character in someone else's story. In her place stood a stranger, Rebecca Mitchell again, alone, running on fumes and fear, and the faint hope that whatever came next might be built on firmer foundation than what had crumbled behind her. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by phantom phone notifications and dreams where Ethan found me, his rage masquerading as concern as he dragged me back to Seattle. I woke with the dawn, salt air seeping through windows I'd cracked open during the night. For the first time since the gala, I allowed myself to fully consider my position. The emergency cash withdrawal my lawyer had facilitated would cover a few weeks of modest living. The prenup had secured Pure Origin's intellectual property and inventory, but those assets remained in storage facilities in Seattle until the legal dust settled. I had my formulation notebooks, my laptop with product specifications, and my raw determination. Everything else, even clothes and personal mementos, remained in the condo that had never truly felt like mine. After a shower in the inn's communal bathroom, I ventured downstairs to find Maggie setting out coffee and homemade scones for the handful of other guests. "Looking more human today?" she observed, pouring me a cup without asking. The coffee tasted better than it had any right to, rich and complex against the buttery scone. Simple pleasures that somehow felt profound after days of existing on adrenaline and vending machine snacks. When Maggie asked how long I'd be staying, I realized I had no answer. "I'm between situations," I finally said, the euphemism inadequate, but preferable to spilling my messy truth to a stranger. Maggie nodded as if this was perfectly normal. "Most people who end up in Cedar Cove are." She refilled my cup, then added, "If you're looking to stay longer than a few nights, you might want to check the community board. Sometimes there are rentals that don't make it to the online listings." She gestured toward a corkboard near the beer entrance, crowded with flyers and business cards. "And if you're needing work, Tidal Basin Cafe is short-staffed since tourist season started early." The community board became my lifeline that morning. Among advertisements for yoga classes and local art shows, I found a faded index card. "Studio apartment above boathouse. rustic but waterproof. Utilities included. Suitable for single occupant. The rent listed was so low compared to Seattle prices that I initially assumed it was weekly rather than monthly. A phone number had been scrawled at the bottom, along with the words, "Serious inquiries only." No, drama. The number connected me to Eleanor Washington, whose clipped, no-nonsense phone manner reminded me of my first business professor in college. Yes, the apartment was still available. Yes, I could see it today. No, she didn't need my life. Story, just first and last month's rent in cash if I wanted it. It's nothing fancy, she warned, giving me directions to a property north of town. But it's clean and private. Some find the isolation appealing. The way she emphasized isolation suggested she counted herself among that number. Eleanor's property revealed itself at the end of a winding gravel road. A modest but well-maintained craftsman house perched on a rocky promontory, with a separate structure closer to the water's edge. This second building, clearly the boathouse mentioned in the ad, had weathered cedar siding and large windows facing the bay. Eleanor herself stood waiting on her porch, a tall, straight-backed woman in her early 70s with close-cropped, white hair and penetrating dark eyes. Before I could offer any greeting, she stated, "You're running from something." Not a question, but an observation delivered without judgment. For a moment, I considered crafting some palatable half-truth, the kind of explanation I might have offered at a Seattle cocktail party. Instead, exhaustion and the strange comfort of a stranger's directness prompted honesty. My husband tried to take my company, then threw wine in my face at a charity event when I refused to sign it over. The words hung in the salt-laden air. Between us. Eleanor nodded once, satisfied. Good. Truth is simpler to maintain than lies. You'll need fewer stories to remember. She turned and began walking toward the boathouse. Marcus will want to know you're not bringing trouble to our doorstep, but that can wait for dinner. Let's show you the apartment first. The apartment occupied what had once been storage space above the actual boathouse. A steep exterior staircase led to a door that opened directly into a single room with a kitchenette along one wall, a sleeping area defined by a privacy screen, and a tiny bathroom tucked under the eaves. What the space lacked in size or luxury, it made up for in character and light. Dormer windows faced the water, filling the room with shifting patterns as sunlight danced across the bay's surface. Simple, sturdy furniture, clearly chosen for function over fashion, included a writing desk positioned to take advantage of the view. Previous tenant was a poet, Eleanor explained, following my gaze to the desk. Found the water conducive to creativity. Left for an artist residency in New Mexico 3 weeks ago. She opened a closet to reveal a hot water heater and circuit panel. Building's been renovated with proper insulation. Stays warm enough in winter. Wi-Fi reaches from the main house. Passwords on the fridge. Questions? Did I have questions? 1,000. But none that mattered against the overwhelming sense that this place, this tiny, remote apartment with its expansive views and distance from Seattle, was exactly what I needed. I paid the deposit and first month's rent from my dwindling cash. Reserves, signing a simple one-page lease that Eleanor produced from her pocket. No credit check. No references, no questions about employment or income stability. Just a human agreement between two women, one offering shelter and the other desperately needing a haven. "Dinner's at 6, Eleanor said as she handed me a set of keys. "Marcus makes a decent cioppino on Tuesdays. Nothing fancy, but there'll be plenty. Bring wine if you drink it. Nothing red." The specific prohibition against red wine, delivered with a knowing look, confirmed that Eleanor had understood more from my brief explanation than I'd explicitly stated. Before I could respond, she was already heading back to the main house. Her message clear. The invitation wasn't optional, and further discussion wasn't necessary. I spent the afternoon shuttling my meager possessions from car to apartment, each trip up the steep stairs a reminder of how little I'd managed to salvage from my previous life. When unpacked, My belongings occupied barely a quarter of the available storage. The remainder echoed with emptiness, a physical manifestation of all I'd left behind. In Seattle, Ethan and I had occupied a 3-bedroom condo filled with designer furniture and curated art. Here, my world had contracted to essential functions: a place to sleep, work, eat, and think. The lack felt oddly freeing rather than depriving. Each object I'd brought represented a deliberate choice made during those frantic packing moments. My most essential skincare formulation notebooks, the laptop containing my business plans and product specifications, clothes selected for practicality rather than impression. No stemware that required careful handling. No throw pillows chosen to complement wall colors. No objects maintained solely because they projected the correct image to visitors. Just the basic architecture of a life I might rebuild. Standing at the window as afternoon light stretched golden fingers across the bay, I excavated this unfamiliar feeling. Lightness. Despite everything, the public humiliation, the financial uncertainty, the grief of a marriage exposed as fundamentally fraudulent, I felt curiously unburdened. The sensation was so foreign that it took me several minutes to identify it as the absence of performance. For years, I'd been maintaining a carefully constructed version of Rebecca Collins, successful entrepreneur and perfect corporate wife. That persona had required constant, exhausting upkeep. Here, with no audience except seagulls and distant fishing boats, that performance could finally end. At 10 minutes to 6, I made my way to the main house, clutching a bottle of white wine I'd found in my car's trunk, a thank you gift from a supplier that I'd forgotten to bring inside our condo months earlier. Small mercies. Eleanor answered my knock with a brief nod of approval at my punctuality, leading me through a comfortable living room lined with bookshelves to a kitchen where a barrel-chested man with a neatly trimmed silver beard stood stirring a pot that filled the room with aromas of seafood and herbs. "Marcus," Eleanor said simply. "This is Rebecca Mitchell, the new tenant." Marcus turned, assessing me with the same direct gaze his wife had employed earlier. Where her eyes had been coolly analytical, however, his held warmth and curiosity. "Welcome to our little corner of nowhere," he said, voice a rich baritone that matched his substantial presence. "Hope you like fish. Can't live on the Oregon coast and serve chicken on a Tuesday." Dinner unfolded with surprisingly easy conversation. Neither Eleanor nor Marcus pressed for details about my situation, but their measured questions about my business, my product philosophy, my long-term goals, created space for me to share what I felt comfortable revealing. I learned that Eleanor had been a corporate attorney specializing in intellectual property law before retiring early. Marcus had built a consulting practice helping small businesses navigate growth challenges, then sold the firm when Eleanor decided she'd had enough of Seattle's increasingly frenetic pace. 15 years ago, Marcus explained, refilling wine glasses, we bought this place as a weekend retreat, kept promising ourselves we'd spend more time here someday. Then Eleanor's doctor found an arrhythmia during a routine physical. He reached across the table to cover his wife's hand with his own, the gesture so naturally affectionate it made my throat tighten. Nothing life-threatening with proper management, but it clarified our priorities considerably. We realized someday needed to be immediately. "Best decision we ever made," Eleanor added, though I won't pretend the transition was smooth. We both missed certain aspects of our previous life. The intellectual stimulation, the sense of purpose. She studied me over the rim of her glass. That's often the hardest part of major life changes, finding new purpose to replace what you've left behind. The insight struck with uncomfortable precision. Beyond escaping Ethan's control, I hadn't thought clearly about what came next. Pure origins had been my purpose, my creative outlet, my professional identity. While the prenup had protected my ownership, the practical reality remained. Daunting. My production facility, suppliers and distribution networks were all in Seattle, all temporarily inaccessible while legal proceedings unfolded. Could I rebuild from nothing, in a town with barely enough population to support a farmer's market? Rebecca, Marcus said, interrupting my spiraling thoughts. Eleanor tells me you develop skincare products from natural ingredients. When I nodded, he continued, There's someone you should meet. Iris Chen supplies botanicals to half the herbalists, between here and Portland. Has greenhouses specializing in native medicinal plants? Remarkable woman. Former biochemist who decided corporate pharmaceutical work was crushing her soul. Marcus collects interesting people the way some collect. Stamps, Eleanor explained with fond exasperation. Can't help connecting the dots between them. She stood, beginning to clear dishes. He'll insist on introducing you, so you might as well yield gracefully. Iris might actually be useful for your work, unlike most of his fascinating connections. Later, as I prepared to return to my new apartment, Marcus pressed a business card into my hand. Iris's contact information. Tell her I sent you. He hesitated, then added with careful casualness, The boathouse itself, the space below your apartment, has been used as a workshop before. Previous tenant never did much with it beyond storing kayaks, but it has decent plumbing and ventilation. If you were looking for product development space, it might serve. The offer, delivered without pressure or expectation, unlocked something that had been tightly coiled within me since leaving Seattle. I'd need to see what equipment I could afford, I said, allowing myself to consider possibilities that had seemed impossible just hours earlier. Start small, basic formulations until I rebuild some capital. Sound business approach, Marcus approved. Start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. At my raised eyebrow, he chuckled. Arthur Ashe said it first. Tennis player, with wisdom beyond his sport. Good night, Rebecca. Sleep well. I returned to my apartment under a canopy of stars more visible here than they'd ever been in Seattle's light-polluted sky. The vastness above reflected the expansive uncertainty before me, but for the first time since Ethan's wine glass had shattered on that gala floor, the uncertainty felt less like an abyss and more like an uncharted sea. Navigable, perhaps, with the right map and compass. That night, I dreamed not of Ethan's rage or the spectacular implosion of my marriage, but of the boathouse below my apartment transformed into a laboratory. Dream me moved confidently between workstations, mixing ingredients, harvested from Oregon's coast and forests. The products that emerged were different from my Seattle line, wilder, more elemental, infused with the same untamed energy as the waves that now lulled me to sleep. I woke with the first gray light of dawn, reaching immediately for the notebook, on my bedside table to capture formulation ideas before they evaporated with sleep's retreat. The act felt both familiar and revolutionary, the muscle memory of creativity reawakening after months of defensive posturing in my disintegrating marriage. How long had it been since I'd felt this spark, this genuine excitement about product development? In the latter days of my Seattle life, Pure Origins had become less about innovation and more about maintenance, maintaining growth trajectories to impress Ethan's investor friends, maintaining the carefully cultivated brand image, maintaining the fiction that business success compensated for personal emptiness. Sitting cross-legged on my bed with the notebook balanced on my knee, I allowed myself to imagine a different version of Pure Origins, one built around Cedar Cove's natural bounty, sea minerals, coastal botanicals, the pristine water itself. A brand that celebrated resilience and regeneration rather than merely promising surface beauty. The synchronicity between this conceptual shift and my personal circumstances wasn't lost on me. If I could rebuild myself from the foundation up after Ethan's betrayal, perhaps my business deserved the same opportunity for transformation. The question remained. How to begin with almost no capital, no equipment, and no established local connections. The practical obstacles towered like the coastal cliffs visible from my window. I needed income while rebuilding, The remaining cash from my emergency withdrawal wouldn't last more than another month. I needed suppliers for raw ingredients, containers, labels. I needed to understand Cedar Cove's local market and whether it could support even a modest relaunch of my business. As morning light strengthened, illuminating dust motes dancing in the beam that slanted through my eastern window, I made the first entry in a new journal. Day 1 in Cedar Cove. Assets, knowledge, experience, determination. Liabilities, limited. Capital, no infrastructure, unknown market. Next steps. 1. Secure income source. 2. Explore local ingredient availability. 3. Assess workshop viability. The simple act of documentation, breaking insurmountable challenges into actionable steps, provided an illusion of control that nevertheless steadied my nerves. After a breakfast of instant coffee and a protein bar from my dwindling supplies, I ventured into town, Maggie's mention of the Tidal Basin Cafe's staffing shortage fresh in my mind. The cafe occupied a weathered blue building at the harbor's edge, its wide deck extending over the water on pilings darkened by decades of tidal cycles. Inside, mismatched tables and chairs created a hodgepodge charm augmented by local art, covering every available wall space. Behind the counter, a harried-looking woman with a complex constellation of tattoos covering both arms juggled coffee orders while shouting instructions to an overwhelmed teenage boy operating the espresso machine. I waited until the morning. Rush subsided before approaching. "I heard you might need help," I said, when the tattooed woman finally had a moment to breathe. She looked me over with the weary skepticism of someone who had hired and lost too many seasonal workers. "You have experience?" Before my marriage, during graduate school, I'd managed a coffee shop in Seattle's University District. The muscle memory of those years remained, the rhythm of drink preparation, the choreography of register and espresso bar, the delicate art of customer management. 3 years as a shift supervisor at Emerald City Coffee, I said, naming the shop that had helped finance my MBA. I can make everything from basic drip to pour-overs, handle register operations, and train staff if needed. I deliberately omitted my more recent history. Entrepreneur, formulator, wife of investment banker. None of those identities would serve me here, in this cafe with its chipped mugs and handwritten menu board. The woman, Lisa, according to her name tag, raised an eyebrow. "Bit overqualified for slinging coffee in a tourist town, aren't you?" When I didn't immediately respond, she sighed. "But beggars can't be choosers, and I'm definitely begging. Kyle's leaving for college in 2 weeks, and my other part-timer just eloped with a marine biologist." She grabbed an application form from beneath the counter. "Can you start tomorrow? Morning shift, 5:30 to 2? It's not glamorous, and tourists can be entitled nightmares, but tips are decent, and you get free food during your shift." Just like that, I had a job. Not the career I'd built in Seattle, not the creative work that had once defined me, but honest labor that would keep me fed and housed while I determined next steps. The immediacy of the solution to at least one pressing problem felt like confirmation that I'd made the right choice in coming to Cedar Cove. As I turned to leave, application completed and start time confirmed, Lisa called after me, "By the way, where are you staying? Housing's tight in summer." When I mentioned the boathouse apartment, her eyes widened slightly. "You're living with the Washingtons? How'd you manage that? They've turned down half the town looking for rentals." Before I could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal too much, she shook her head. "Never mind. Not my business. But if Eleanor Washington has decided you're acceptable, your stock just rose considerably around here. That woman has the most finely calibrated bullshit detector on the Oregon coast." The observation stayed with me as I continued exploring the town that had become my unexpected refuge. Cedar Cove's main street comprised barely 3 blocks of businesses. The cafe, a bookstore, a hardware shop, art galleries, a grocery co-op, and various tourist-oriented boutiques selling coastal-themed trinkets and apparel. The year-round population clearly expanded significantly during summer months, with visitors drawn to the dramatic coastline and the arts community that had established itself over decades. At the co-op, I found a help-wanted notice similar to the cafe's, part-time. Inventory manager needed immediately. The position would complement rather than conflict with my cafe hours. On impulse, I inquired inside, where the manager, a gentle-voiced man with gray dreadlocks secured in a neat bundle, seemed almost pathetically grateful for my interest and business background. By lunchtime, I had secured 2 part-time jobs that together would cover my modest living expenses. The achievement felt simultaneously liberating and humbling. Freedom from immediate financial panic purchased at the cost of professional identity. With basic survival needs addressed, I turned my attention to the second task on my list: exploring local ingredient availability. Iris Chen's business card burned in my pocket, Marcus's introduction offering a potential shortcut into the local supply community. But as I stood outside the converted warehouse that housed the co-op, another impulse seized me: to directly experience the natural bounty of this new environment before filtering it through someone else's expertise. I followed a trail marked by a weathered wooden sign reading Tide Pools, 1.2 miles. The path winding down through wind-sculpted pines to a rocky beach, different from the tourist-friendly strands closer to town. Here, the coast revealed its raw character: jagged black rocks, pools of crystal-clear seawater teeming with life, seaweed in varieties I'd never encountered in Seattle's more sterile markets. Kneeling beside one particularly vibrant pool, I watched anemones wave delicate tentacles in the gentle current, while hermit crabs conducted their cautious business around barnacle-encrusted rocks. The coastal ecosystem displayed before me represented untapped potential for skincare formulations: mineral-rich seawater, algae with documented moisturizing properties, botanicals adapted to thrive in harsh salt spray and constant wind. Elements that might infuse products with the same resilience the environment demanded from its native species. I collected small samples in the zip-top bags I'd fortuitously stuffed into my jacket pocket. Not enough for production, but sufficient for preliminary experimentation once I established a workspace. As afternoon light softened toward evening, I made my way back to the boathouse, pausing at the structure's lower level before climbing the stairs to my apartment. The space Marcus had mentioned as a potential workshop was accessible through double doors facing the water, likely designed for boat storage originally but adaptable to other purposes. Inside, the concrete floor sloped gently toward a central drain. Windows lined the water-facing wall, providing natural light and ventilation possibilities. Bare studs between support posts offered opportunities for shelving or workbenches. The space whispered with possibility. In its current state, it was merely an empty shell. No equipment, no utilities beyond basic plumbing and electricity. But I could envision workstations for formulating, storage areas for raw materials, perhaps eventually a small packaging operation. Starting over from scratch wasn't what I'd planned for Pure Origins, but standing in that empty boathouse with seawater samples in my pocket and the sound of waves providing rhythmic accompaniment to my thoughts, I felt the first true stirring of excitement since leaving Seattle. That evening, I sat at the small desk in my apartment, laptop open to a blank document. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, poised to begin a business plan for Pure Origins 2.0, or whatever this new iteration might become. The blinking cursor seemed to pulse with the question that had haunted me since watching Seattle recede in my rearview mirror. Was I fleeing or advancing? Running from a failed marriage and business takeover attempt, or moving toward something that might ultimately prove more authentic and fulfilling? The distinction mattered. One path was reactive, shaped primarily by what I sought to escape. The other was proactive, guided by a vision of what might be possible in this unexpected new chapter. Eleanor's earlier observation about finding new purpose echoed in my mind. I didn't want to define myself forever as Ethan Collins's ex-wife, or the woman who narrowly escaped a hostile takeover of her company. I needed to create an identity and business forged from genuine passion rather than defensive positioning. With sudden clarity, I typed the document title, Pure Origins, Coastal Regeneration. Below it, a mission statement began to form, not a complete business plan yet, but a declaration of intent. Harnessing the resilience of Oregon's coastal ecosystems to create skincare that supports natural regeneration and adaptation. Products developed in harmony with local environments, contributing to rather than extracting from the communities that inspire them. The words felt right, aligned with both my personal journey and the business philosophy I'd always aspired to, but had compromised in subtle ways during my marriage. With Ethan's influence removed, with the pressure to scale rapidly for investor satisfaction eliminated, I could return to first principles: quality over quantity, sustainability over rapid growth, authentic connection over market positioning. Whether this vision would translate into commercial success remained uncertain, but for the first time since the gala's red wine had stained my blouse and clarity, the path forward felt authentic to my core values. A knock at my door startled me from my planning reverie. Eleanor stood on the landing, a canvas grocery bag in one hand. "Thought you might need provisions," she said, handing me the bag without ceremony. Inside, I found basics: coffee, eggs, bread, fruit, granola, the staples of a temporary kitchen. The thoughtfulness of the gesture coming from a woman who projected such self-contained strength caught me off guard. "Thank you," I said, emotion thickening my voice. "For everything. The apartment, dinner last night, this." I gestured with the bag. I keep finding myself without adequate words lately. That's new for me. Eleanor's expression softened marginally. Major life disruptions have that effect. Strip away our practiced vocabularies, force us back to essentials. She turned to leave, then paused. "Marcus mentioned you might be interested in the boathouse space. If so, we should discuss terms. No rush. Take time to be certain it meets your needs." With that, she descended the stairs, leaving me once again marveling at the Washington's particular blend of boundary and generosity. That night, as I made a simple dinner from Eleanor's provisions, my phone, the new one, unknown to Ethan, chimed. With a text from my lawyer. Preliminary hearing scheduled. Contesting prenup clause activation. Claims incident was momentary frustration, not qualifying aggression. Evidence and witnesses strong on our side. Updates as available. Stay well. Stay hidden. The message crystallized something I'd been feeling since arriving in Cedar Cove. This wasn't merely a temporary refuge, but potentially a long-term relocation. Whatever legal resolution eventually emerged, returning to Seattle would mean re-entering Ethan's sphere of influence. Something my emerging sense of self-preservation recognized as dangerous regardless of judicial outcomes. The realization should have been frightening. This confirmation that I was truly starting over rather than briefly regrouping. Instead, as I looked around the small apartment with its expansive views and promise of self-determination, I felt the final pieces of my decision locking into place. Cedar Cove hadn't been in any 5-year plan. The boathouse workshop wasn't the state-of-the-art lab I'd once envisioned for Pure Origins expansion. Serving coffee wasn't the career trajectory I'd mapped after earning my MBA, but the path that had led me here, however painful and unplanned, offered something my carefully constructed former life had increasingly lacked: the opportunity to build something authentic, aligned with my values rather than someone else's expectations. The chance to discover who Rebecca Mitchell might become when not defined as an extension of Ethan Collins's ambitions. Tomorrow would bring the first morning shift at the cafe, the beginning of an income stream independent of my soon-to-be ex-husband. The day after, I would call the number on Iris Chen's card, exploring local botanical possibilities with a former biochemist who had similarly chosen purpose over prestige. The following week, I would discuss terms for the boathouse workshop with the Washingtons, beginning the slow process of rebuilding Pure Origins from its essential elements. Each step small, each decision mine alone. The complexity of emotions this new reality evoked, grief and liberation, anxiety and anticipation, seemed perfectly matched to the view outside my window, where moonlight now silvered the bay's surface. Depths concealed beneath seemingly simple beauty, constant movement beneath apparent stillness. The next wave already forming as the current one reached shore. I closed my laptop, my mission statement and nascent plans saved but incomplete. Tomorrow would be time enough to continue building. Tonight was for acknowledging the foundation already laid in these first crucial days of my Cedar Cove rebirth. The first week at Tidal Basin Cafe passed in a blur of steam and coffee grounds. I fell into the rhythm of early mornings, rising at 4:30 a.m., watching dawn break over the water during my walk to town, and arriving in time to start the industrial coffee makers before the first fishermen appeared seeking caffeine before heading out to sea. There was something grounding about the physical nature of the work, so different from the executive decisions and investor meetings that had dominated my Seattle existence. My hands developed calluses from handling hot equipment rather than paper cuts from contract reviews. My feet ached from standing rather than from designer heels. The simplicity felt like meditation after years of complexity. Lisa, the cafe owner, watched me with increasing approval as I mastered her ancient espresso machine and developed rapport with the regulars. "You're overqualified," she remarked on my fifth morning, leaning against the counter during a rare quiet moment. "But there's something refreshing about watching someone treat a minimum wage job like it matters." I looked up from the latte art. I'd been perfecting, something I'd learned during graduate school and found myself enjoying again. "It does matter," I replied, carefully pouring steamed milk to create a delicate fern pattern. "This might be someone's only moment of beauty in a difficult day." She tilted her head, reassessing me. "Who exactly are you, Rebecca Mitchell? Nobody moves to Cedar Cove in May without a backstory." The question was direct, but not unkind. I'd been fielding similar inquiries all week, from customers curious about the new face, from my coworker Kyle who found my competence suspicious, from vendors making deliveries. I'd developed a simplified narrative, entrepreneur taking a sabbatical, to reconsider direction, drawn to the coast for inspiration, close enough to truth without revealing vulnerabilities I wasn't ready to share. "Someone starting over," I told Lisa, the honesty slipping out before I could reconsider. "The details aren't particularly interesting." She nodded, accepting the boundary without offense. "Fair enough. Starting over is practically Cedar Cove's unofficial motto. Half the business owners in town have reinvention stories." She gestured toward a customer entering, a woman in her 50s with a camera bag, slung over one shoulder. "Take Valerie there, award-winning photojournalist who covered wars for 20 years. Now she runs the gallery 3 doors down and only photographs seabirds and coastal landscapes. Says she needed to capture creation instead of destruction for a while." The cafe served as an unexpected education in Cedar Cove's social ecosystem. From my position behind the counter, I observed connections and power dynamics that would have taken months to discern otherwise. The town operated on relationships more than transactions, favors exchanged, skills bartered, reputations carefully maintained across years. Artists and craftspeople dominated the permanent population, supplemented by fishing families with generational claims to the harbor and a small professional class providing essential services. Tourism sustained the economy but didn't define the community's character. Most notably, Eleanor and Marcus Washington occupied a position of quiet influence I hadn't immediately recognized. References to them peppered conversations. Marcus's business advice sought before major decisions. Eleanor's legal insights deferred to in community disputes. They weren't wealthy by Seattle standards, but their combination of expertise, integrity, and selective engagement made them something rarer, respected elders whose approval carried weight. The realization that they had extended protection over me simply by accepting me as a tenant explained the careful courtesy I received from locals, despite my newcomer status. My afternoon shifts at the co-op offered different insights. While the cafe connected me to Cedar Cove's social fabric, the co-op revealed its economic underpinnings. Working inventory exposed me to the region's agricultural producers, artisanal food crafters, and botanical suppliers. Alan, the dreadlocked manager, quickly recognized my business background and began delegating responsibilities beyond simple stock management, vendor negotiations, ordering optimization, display arrangement. The work was engaging without being consuming, allowing mental space to continue developing plans for Pure Origin's revival. Nearly 2 weeks into my Cedar Cove existence, I finally called the number on Iris Chen's business card. A brisk, no-nonsense voice answered, clearly accustomed to efficient communication. West Coast Botanicals. When I mentioned Marcus's referral, her tone warmed marginally. The Washingtons have good judgment about people. What can I help you with? I explained my background in natural skincare formulation and interest in local ingredients, carefully avoiding specifics about my circumstances. Iris listened without interruption, then said simply, "Come see the operation tomorrow. Bring appropriate footwear. We start at 7. We start at 7 proved to be an understatement. When I arrived at the address Iris had provided, a former dairy farm several miles inland from the coast, I found her already deep into the day's harvest, directing 3 workers collecting flowering herbs from meticulously maintained beds. Iris herself defied easy categorization. Late 50s with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a practical bun, wearing mud-spattered boots and cargo pants while consulting planting charts on a high-end tablet. She acknowledged my arrival with a nod before handing me gardening gloves. "Observation happens alongside work here. Help Thomas with the calendula while we talk." For the next 3 hours, I harvested delicate orange blossoms while Iris moved between greenhouses and outdoor growing areas, explaining her operation in precise, technical terms that revealed her scientific background. West Coast Botanicals supplied medicinal herbs and specialty botanicals to herbalists, small-batch beauty companies, and high-end restaurants throughout the Pacific Northwest. Unlike larger commercial operations, Iris maintained heirloom varieties and specialized in plants with specific medicinal or cosmetic applications, many cultivated using traditional techniques from her Chinese heritage, alongside modern sustainable farming practices. Most commercial suppliers force rapid growth through artificial conditions, she explained, examining seedlings in a humidity-controlled greenhouse. It increases yield but compromises phytochemical profiles. The compounds that make botanicals effective for skincare or medicine develop in response to environmental stressors, variable weather, insect pressure, competition with other plants. Perfect growing conditions produce weak chemistry. The observation struck me as both scientifically sound and metaphorically resonant with my own situation. Stress forcing stronger development. Over lunch, a simple but perfect meal of vegetables. Harvested minutes earlier, Iris asked pointed questions about my formulation approach and ingredient standards. Her interest seemed professional rather than personal, evaluating whether my work merited access to her carefully cultivated botanicals. I found myself speaking with a passion I hadn't felt in months, detailing my commitment to efficacy over marketing claims, my preference for whole plant extracts rather than isolated compounds, my experiments with preservation methods that minimized synthetic additives. "You understand the principles," she concluded, appearing moderately impressed. "Most beauty entrepreneurs I meet are marketers first, formulators second, if at all. They want ingredients that sound appealing on labels rather than constituents. That functions synergistically." She studied me over her teacup. "The Washingtons mentioned you're establishing a workspace in their boathouse. What equipment do you have currently?" When I admitted to having nothing beyond formulation notebooks and raw material samples, she nodded, as if confirming a suspicion. Starting from zero. She rose from the table, gesturing for me to follow her to a storage building behind the main barn. Inside, amid neatly organized shelves of dried botanicals, stood laboratory equipment: scales, hot plates, glassware, a small centrifuge. My previous lab setup before I expanded 3 years ago. Not state-of-the-art, but functional for small batch development. It's been collecting dust. You can use it until you're established enough to invest in your own. The unexpected generosity left me momentarily speechless. In Seattle's competitive entrepreneurial community, such assistance would have come with ownership stakes or exclusivity agreements at minimum. Iris waved away my stuttered thanks with characteristic directness. Marcus said you're legitimate. I have ingredients that work best in skincare applications, but limited time to develop formulations myself. We'll establish a collaborative arrangement once you're operational. For now, consider it a properly vetted investment in future possibilities. She handed me a laminated card, listing harvest days for different botanicals. You're welcome here. On these mornings if you want fresh material. Otherwise, the co-op carries my dried stock. Coastal ingredients, seaweeds, salt, minerals. You'll need to source elsewhere. Talk to Devin Lewis about sustainable harvesting permits. He manages the Marine Sanctuary Program and monitors commercial collection. The information came with implicit endorsement. Iris was essentially providing a roadmap to Cedar Cove's ingredient supply network, doors that might have taken months to locate and open otherwise. As I prepared to leave, Iris offered one final observation. Cedar Cove functions on reciprocity, not just transactions. Remember that as you establish yourself here. The principle seemed to underscore all the interactions I'd had since arriving, from Maggie's discretion at the inn, to the Washington's practical support, to Lisa's gradual inclusion at the cafe. The community operated on a complex exchange, a value that encompassed but transcended simple economics. My instinct to protect myself through privacy was understandable, but potentially limiting in this environment where judicious vulnerability might yield stronger connections. I returned to the boathouse that evening with my mind churning, not just with formulation possibilities unleashed by access to Iris's equipment and botanicals, but with larger questions about integration versus isolation. My Seattle strategy had been clear: project confidence, never reveal weakness, maintain careful control over personal narrative. Those habits had served me well in competitive business environments but felt increasingly misaligned with Cedar Cove's more transparent social contract. The protective walls I'd built seemed to be blocking potential allies as effectively as they deterred threats. The following morning, Eleanor intercepted me as I left for my cafe shift. Marcus and I would like to discuss the workshop space this evening if you're available. Her tone remained characteristically neutral, but a certain tension around her eyes suggested the conversation might encompass more than rental terms. I agreed to dinner at 6, then spent my shift mentally preparing counteroffers for whatever price they might suggest for the boathouse use, calculating what I could afford. From my combined cafe and co-op income while still rebuilding business capital. When I arrived at their house that evening, I found not just Eleanor and Marcus, but a third person, a compact, weathered man in his 60s introduced as Devin Lewis, the Marine Sanctuary Program manager Iris had mentioned. The dinner conversation initially followed familiar patterns: Eleanor's precise observations about local matters, Marcus's warmer elaborations, my careful contributions when directly addressed. Devin mostly listened, asking occasional questions that revealed genuine interest in my skincare formulation philosophy. After dessert, Eleanor's surprisingly delicate lavender shortbread, Marcus cleared his throat in what I'd come to recognize as his signal for shifting to substantive matters. Rebecca, we've been discussing your potential use of the boathouse workshop. There are considerations beyond simple rental arrangements. Eleanor nodded, taking over with characteristic efficiency. The space has adequate ventilation and drainage for small-scale production, but would require upgrades for anything beyond development work. Additionally, commercial use has zoning implications. My heart sank, anticipating regulatory roadblocks that would derail my rebuilding plans before they properly began. Then Devin leaned forward. That's partly why I'm here. The property falls within the coastal management zone I oversee. Commercial activities require environmental impact assessment. Before my disappointment could fully form, he continued. However, the Sanctuary program has a small business incubator specifically for enterprises utilizing local resources sustainably. Participants receive streamlined permitting and technical assistance in exchange for environmental stewardship commitments. Marcus's expression remained carefully neutral, but his eyes revealed satisfaction at Devin's interest. We thought your approach to formulation might align with program objectives. If so, it would simplify several aspects of establishing operations here. The conversation that followed revealed careful coordination among the three of them. Eleanor had researched permit requirements, Marcus had spoken with Devin about the incubator program, and Devin had reviewed public information about Pure, Origin's previous ecological commitments in Seattle. You've been discussing my business, I observed, emotions somewhere between gratitude and discomfort at being the subject of behind-the-scenes conversations. Eleanor met my gaze directly. Yes. Selectively, and only with those positioned to provide meaningful assistance. Her frankness demanded equal honesty in return. I'm not accustomed to accepting help, I admitted. In Seattle, support always came with hidden costs. Cedar Cove operates differently, Devin said, echoing Iris's earlier sentiment. We invest in people and enterprises that strengthen the community ecosystem. Your skincare business could provide economic opportunities while promoting the region's natural resources, if developed thoughtfully. He slid a folder across the table containing incubator program details. Review these materials. If you're interested, I'll need a basic business plan and environmental impact statement. Nothing elaborate, just enough to establish intentions and approach. The offer represented far more than workspace access. The incubator would provide legal framework for rebuilding Pure Origins, technical support for sustainable harvesting, and implicit community endorsement, resources I couldn't have accessed through financial means alone. The generosity was overwhelming, but came with clear expectations, genuine commitment to Cedar Cove's environmental values, transparent business practices, community reciprocity. Not obligations to any individual, but to the social ecosystem I sought to join. My response came easier than expected. I'd be honored to apply for the incubator program. My business has always prioritized sustainability, but developing formulations, specifically centered on local coastal ecosystems, would allow deeper integration of those values. The words felt simultaneously professional and deeply personal. The first time since arriving in Cedar Cove that I'd spoken about my work without carefully maintained barriers between business and identity. After Devin left, Marcus refilled wine glasses while Eleanor retrieved a simple contract from her office, a month-to-month agreement for the boathouse workshop at a rate significantly below market value for commercial space. Consider it transitional support until you're established, she explained, forestalling my objections. The rate increases incrementally as revenue develops. The structure was elegant in its simplicity, affording me immediate access to necessary space while maintaining appropriate business boundaries and acknowledging the temporary nature of the arrangement. I signed without haggling, another departure from my Seattle business approach. Thank you both for everything. The inadequacy of the phrase hung in the air until Marcus chuckled. You're still cataloging the everything, I imagine. Takes time to recognize the full scope of major life transitions. His perception was unnervingly accurate. Each day in Cedar Cove revealed new dimensions of what I'd left behind and what might be possible ahead, a constantly shifting inventory. of losses and gains that defied simple calculation. Eleanor studied me with unusual openness. "You remind me of myself 30 years ago. Different circumstances, but similar essence. Professional woman, accustomed to controlling variables, suddenly navigating unpredictable terrain." The comparison startled me, not just the personal observation from typically reserved Eleanor, but the implied journey from my current uncertainty to her evident self-possession. "Does it get easier?" I asked, the question emerging more vulnerable than intended. "Not easier," she replied after consideration. "More authentic. The energy previously devoted to maintaining facades becomes available for actual living." She glanced at Marcus, their decades of partnership evident in the look that passed between them. "We've found that sufficient compensation for increased complexity." The conversation shifted to practical matters: workshop key arrangements, utility access, storage considerations. But Eleanor's observation lingered as I walked back to my apartment under a canopy of emerging stars. Authenticity as an alternative to control. The concept challenged fundamental assumptions that had guided my personal and professional development. In Seattle, I'd achieved success precisely by controlling variables: brand messaging, product, quality, professional image, even my marriage presentation. The approach had built Pure Origins into a valuable business, but had ultimately failed to protect what mattered most when Ethan decided to seize control. The following week unfolded with new purposefulness: mornings at the cafe, afternoons at the co-op, evenings and one precious day off dedicated to establishing my workshop and developing application materials for the Sanctuary Incubator program. Iris's equipment, transported by Marcus's pickup truck and installed with his practical assistance, transformed the empty boathouse into a functional development space. Basic shelving constructed from reclaimed wood provided storage for the botanical samples I'd begun collecting: seaweeds harvested under Devon's guidance, coastal plants identified during walks with a local herbalist Iris had introduced, minerals extracted from clay deposits along specific beaches. Each interaction expanded my understanding of Cedar Cove's interconnected systems. The herbalist who showed me sustainable harvesting techniques purchased her honey from a beekeeper who bought coffee exclusively from Lisa's cafe. The woodworker who helped install shelving traded services with the fisherman who supplied the restaurant that ordered produce from Iris's farm. The economy functioned on relationships as much as currency, a complex web of reciprocity that provided resilience against market fluctuations affecting tourist-dependent businesses. 3 weeks into establishing my workshop, I experienced a breakthrough that crystallized the direction for Pure Origins' rebirth. Experimenting with a seaweed harvested from a specific cove, I discovered that traditional extraction methods failed to capture its most beneficial compounds. On impulse, I adapted a technique mentioned in one of Marcus's books on indigenous coastal traditions, a cold infusion process using locally harvested salt and moonlit timing. The resulting extract possessed remarkable properties: exceptional hydration capacity, noticeable skin barrier repair effect, and a faint natural iridescence that no synthetic additive could replicate. Working through the night, I incorporated the extract into 3 sample formulations: a lightweight face serum, an intensive repair mask, and a protective balm for wind-chapped skin. Each product embodied a different aspect of coastal resilience: the serum's adaptability, the mask's regenerative capacity, the balm's protective barrier. Together, they represented not just skincare but a philosophy: working with environmental challenges rather than against them, finding strength through flexibility rather than rigid resistance. The next afternoon, I brought samples to the sanctuary office where Devon was reviewing my incubator application. He examined the products with scientific interest, noting the extraction method's alignment with traditional ecological knowledge his program sought to preserve. When he applied a small amount of balm to his weather-roughened hands, his eyebrows rose at the immediate improvement in texture and comfort. "This is different from conventional products," he observed. "Less about disguising damage, more about supporting natural recovery processes. Exactly, I confirmed, the directions suddenly clear. Pure origins, coastal resilience. Skincare inspired by ecosystems that thrive despite constant challenge. Salt spray, wind erosion, tidal disruption. Formulations that support skin's innate capacity for adaptation rather than imposing artificial solutions. The concept represented both continuity and evolution from my original brand vision, maintaining core values of natural efficacy while embracing a deeper ecological framework that reflected my own journey from disruption to renewal. Devon nodded slowly. That narrative connects personal care to environmental stewardship in compelling ways. Perfect alignment with Sanctuary program objectives. He made notes in my application file, then looked up with unusual animation. The summer artisan market is happening in 3 weeks. Established vendors are already selected, but the community booth has space for incubator participants to share product concepts and gather feedback. Would be valuable market research for your Sanctuary application. The invitation represented my first public presentation of Pure Origin's new direction, a significant step from private development to community engagement. I'd need to prepare proper samples, informational materials. I began calculating necessary steps, mind racing with logistics. Devon smiled slightly. Talk to Valerie at the photography gallery. She coordinates the community booth and has a background in brand presentation. And Rebecca? I looked up from my mental planning. This is how Cedar Cove works. We connect people who should know each other. My display reflected weeks of integration into Cedar Cove's aesthetic and values. Glass bottles containing serum and balm wrapped in hand-pressed seaweed paper, ingredient sourcing mapped on recycled nautical charts, photographs of harvest locations, paired with microscope images of extracted compounds. The presentation told a story of connection between personal care and environmental stewardship, between scientific formulation and traditional ecological knowledge, between individual resilience and community regeneration. The market opened. At 10, visitors gradually filtering through display areas with the leisurely pace of summer tourists mixed with the purposeful shopping of locals. My first interested browsers approached tentatively, drawn by the unusual botanical display. They listened to my explanation of coastal-inspired formulations with polite interest that transformed to genuine engagement when they experienced the products directly, the unexpected silkiness of seaweed extract, the immediate comfort of wind protection, balm, the subtle natural fragrance of shore herbs. By noon, a small crowd regularly gathered around my section of the community table. Word had apparently spread about the seaweed skincare being offered by the new woman at the Washington's place. I recognized cafe regulars, co-op customers, and various Cedar Cove residents I'd encountered during my 6 weeks in town. They tested samples, asked thoughtful questions, and offered surprisingly technical feedback about texture preferences and packaging functionality. Several purchased sample sizes despite limited quantity, while others left contact information for future availability. The validation of market interest provided necessary confirmation that Pure Origin's new direction resonated beyond my personal vision. Cedar Cove represented a dramatically different market from Seattle's status-conscious urban professionals, but these customers demonstrated sophisticated understanding of natural formulations and willingness to support quality local production. The financial scale would never match my previous operation, but the business model offered something potentially more valuable: sustainability, independent of constant growth pressure. Late in the afternoon, as market activity reached peak intensity, I looked up from a conversation with a potential customer to find a familiar figure standing at the edge of my display area. Eleanor Washington observed silently, her expression characteristically contained yet somehow approving. After the customer moved on, she approached with deliberate steps. "Your presentation reflects thoughtful integration of local elements," she noted, examining the display with professional assessment. "Appropriate restraint in claims, clear value proposition, Well executed. Coming from Eleanor, this constituted effusive praise. Thank you, I replied, grateful for her specific notice of elements that had required careful consideration. The response has been encouraging. She nodded slightly, then surprised me by extending her palm, where a business card rested, not her own, but one bearing the logo of a regional business publication. Catherine Monroe, editor of Northwest Entrepreneur Quarterly, staying with us this weekend. Has interest in regenerative business models. I've mentioned your work. She placed the card on my display table. Call tomorrow if you wish to discuss feature possibilities. Before I could properly process this unexpected development, Eleanor continued with characteristic precision. You've found your footing here more rapidly than anticipated. The workshop arrangement is functioning well. Devin reports your incubator application shows promise. These are positive indicators. She paused, studying me with unusual directness. Cedar Cove can be more than temporary refuge. Some find it suitable for long-term growth, personal and professional. The observation addressed questions I'd barely articulated to myself, whether Cedar Cove represented transitional shelter or potential home, whether pure origins, coastal resilience constituted a placeholder until legal matters resolved, or a legitimate new direction deserving full commitment. Eleanor wasn't offering answers but acknowledging the crossroads with characteristic perception. I'm beginning to consider that possibility, I admitted, the statement feeling like significant disclosure despite its simplicity. She nodded once. Message delivered. Dinner Tuesday, 7 o'clock. Catherine will join us. With that, she departed, moving through the market with dignified purpose, stopping occasionally at other artisans' displays with brief but focused attention. I watched her progress, understanding that her visit to my booth represented more than casual interest. It constituted public acknowledgement of connection, a signal to the community regarding my status within Cedar Cove's social ecosystem. As the market concluded and vendors began dismantling displays, I found myself surrounded by evidence of unexpected belonging. Empty sample containers indicating customer interest, a list of contact information from people requesting product, availability, business cards from local shop owners inquiring about future wholesale possibilities. Most significantly, conversations throughout the day had gradually shifted from "Where are you from?" to "What are you creating here?" The subtle but crucial transition from outsider to community participant. That evening, sitting on my apartment deck watching sunset paint the bay in impossible colors, I reviewed the day's events with a sense of quiet wonder. 6 weeks earlier, I'd arrived in Cedar Cove with nothing but emergency cash, formulation, notebooks, and bone-deep exhaustion from betrayal. The woman who had fled Seattle in crisis bore increasingly little resemblance to the person now contemplating regional business features and incubator program participation. The transformation wasn't complete. Legal proceedings continued in absentia, emotional processing remained ongoing, professional identity still evolved, but foundations had undeniably formed for whatever came next. My phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. Impressive display today. The seaweed extract especially notable. Would like to discuss potential collaboration when you're ready. Iris. The message represented another thread in the developing tapestry of Cedar Cove connections. Not friendship exactly, but professional respect and potential partnership based on complementary expertise. Similar messages had arrived from Devin regarding incubator program feedback, from a local spa owner interested in treatment protocols, from Valerie with photographs she'd taken of my display for portfolio use. Each interaction formed part of an emerging support structure fundamentally different from what I'd known in Seattle. There, professional relationships had been characterized by strategic positioning and careful impression management, constant awareness of competitive advantage and potential exploitation. Here, competition seemed less relevant than complementary function within a shared ecosystem. The mentorship offered by Eleanor and Marcus, Iris and Devin, Valerie and others emerged, not from charity, but from recognition of mutual benefit through collective flourishing. As darkness settled over the bay and stars emerged in unpolluted sky, I allowed myself to acknowledge a truth that had been forming since the market's first encouraging interactions. I didn't want to return to Seattle. Not to reclaim my previous business incarnation, not to prove resilience to those who had witnessed my humiliation, not even to personally confront Ethan with evidence of recovery. The woman who had defined success through external validation and growth metrics was gradually yielding to someone measuring value differently, through authenticity of expression, through alignment of personal and professional purpose, through meaningful integration within community. The realization didn't eliminate all uncertainty or resolve practical challenges still facing Pure Origin's rebirth. Financial stability remained tenuous, legal matters unfinished, long-term viability unproven. Yet something fundamental had shifted, from survival mode to intentional rebuilding, from reactive protection to proactive creation. The sanctuary I'd found in Cedar Cove had provided not just safety from immediate threat, but space to rediscover essential truths obscured during years of compromise and accommodation. I texted my lawyer one final message before sleep. Proceeding with settlement approach as discussed. Not returning for proceedings. Will handle remotely. Cedar Cove address is permanent for foreseeable future. The decision felt simultaneously momentous and entirely natural, like stepping through a door I'd been approaching without full awareness for weeks. Whatever challenges awaited on this path, they would be navigated from a foundation of growing authenticity rather than defensive positioning. That difference alone made the direction worth pursuing, a realization that accompanied me into dreams of seaweed gardens and coastal resilience, of storm-weathered growth and unexpected renewal. Catherine Monroe had a journalist's talent for drawing out details I hadn't intended to share. Over dinner at the Washingtons' home, her questions peeled back layers of my carefully constructed narrative with such disarming warmth that I found myself describing my Seattle to Cedar Cove journey with unprecedented candor. Her salt and pepper hair framed an expressive face that registered genuine interest rather than mere professional curiosity. Eleanor observed our conversation with quiet approval, occasionally filling gaps with contextual information about Cedar Cove's business ecosystem that positioned my emerging venture within a larger regional narrative. "What fascinates me," Catherine said, sipping the local Pinot Noir Marcus had opened, "is how your business concept has evolved to reflect personal transformation. The original Pure Origins emphasized purity and origins, controlled processes, predictable outcomes. This coastal adaptation embraces variability and resilience instead." Her observation illuminated connections I'd felt intuitively, but hadn't articulated so precisely. Products designed to work with environmental stressors, rather than against them. That's a profound philosophical shift. "Necessity driving innovation," Eleanor commented, her first direct contribution to the discussion of my business approach. "Adaptation is intelligence expressing itself through circumstances." The statement carried weight beyond business strategy, acknowledging the personal journey underlying my professional pivot without requiring explicit disclosure of painful details. Catherine nodded thoughtfully, recognizing the multiple layers of meaning. "That's exactly the angle I'd like to explore in the feature," she said, making notes in a small leather-bound journal. "Not just product development, but the broader implications for sustainable business models in transitional economies. Coastal communities like Cedar Cove are navigating their own transformations, from resource extraction to experience economies, from seasonal dependency to year-round sustainability. Your business embodies themes relevant beyond skincare. The proposed feature would position Pure Origins, coastal resilience as a case study in regenerative business practices, enterprises that contributed positively to environmental and community ecosystems rather than merely mitigating negative impacts. Catherine's editorial approach transcended conventional business reporting that emphasized growth metrics and competitive positioning. Instead, she explored how ventures could succeed financially while advancing ecological and social resilience. The concept resonated deeply with the direction I'd been instinctively pursuing since arriving in Cedar Cove. "When would you need to conduct the main interview?" I asked, mentally calculating preparation required before such public exposure. Catherine smiled, closing her notebook. "We just completed it. I have what I need for the profile section. For the technical aspects, formulation philosophy, ingredient sourcing, production methods, I'd like to visit your workshop tomorrow if convenient. Seeing processes firsthand provides texture impossible to capture through description alone." Her statement stunned me momentarily. The casual dinner conversation I'd navigated with decreasing guardedness had actually been the substantive interview. While I'd been consciously present and thoughtful in my responses, I hadn't filtered with the precision I would have applied had I recognized the exchange as on-record professional documentation. The realization triggered a flicker of my old protective instincts, concern about controlling narrative, managing impressions, strategically positioning information. Eleanor, ever perceptive, noted my hesitation. "Catherine's approach prioritizes authenticity," she observed calmly. "Calculated responses rarely capture essential truths." Her implication was clear. The interview format had deliberately bypassed my professional armor to access more genuine insights. Rather than feeling manipulated, I found myself strangely relieved. The woman I was becoming in Cedar Cove had less need for carefully constructed presentations than the executive I'd been in Seattle. "The workshop isn't particularly photogenic yet," I warned Catherine, surrendering to the process. "We're still in development phase rather than production." She waved away my concern. "Early stages often reveal more about vision and values than polished operations. Readers connect with authentic creation stories, the messy, real processes behind finished products." Her perspective aligned with what I'd been learning from Cedar Cove's artisan community. Transparency about process created deeper connection than perfected presentation. The workshop tour the following morning forced me to view my emerging operation through external eyes. The converted boathouse contained evidence of recent evolution. Iris's donated equipment now supplemented with vintage glassware found at estate sales, raw ingredient samples organized on reclaimed shelves, formulation notebooks open beside a microscope purchased secondhand from a retiring biology teacher. The space lacked the gleaming stainless steel and precise organization of my Seattle lab, but possessed character that reflected integrated purpose rather than standardized production. Catherine photographed elements that would never have featured in my previous marketing materials: the stone collection basin filled with seawater for mineral extraction, the handwritten formulation adjustments noting weather conditions during harvesting, the recycled containers used for test batches. She asked thoughtful questions about extraction methodologies, preservation systems, and quality control processes. Unlike many business journalists I'd encountered in Seattle, she demonstrated genuine understanding of technical details while connecting them to broader philosophical implications. "Your approach embodies principles we're seeing across multiple sectors," she noted, examining a tray of seaweed samples at different processing stages. "Hyperlocal sourcing, circular production systems, embedded environmental monitoring, direct producer-customer feedback loops. The scale is intentionally limited, but the impact potentially significant through demonstration effects." Her analysis identified patterns I'd been implementing intuitively, connecting my isolated decisions to emerging economic frameworks focused on regeneration rather than extraction. The feature article would be published in Northwest Entrepreneur Quarterly's fall issue, providing approximately 2 months to advance from development to initial production. The timeline created healthy pressure to solidify formulations, finalize packaging, establish pricing structures, and create sales channels, transforming Pure Origins, coastal resilience from concept to viable enterprise. The workshop that had functioned primarily as development space would need to accommodate small batch production, while maintaining formulation integrity. As Catherine packed her camera equipment, she offered a parting insight. What you're developing here isn't just products but proof of concept for values-aligned enterprise. Don't underestimate the significance of that demonstration effect. Her words would prove prophetic in ways neither of us anticipated that morning. The Northwest Entrepreneur Quarterly feature would eventually catalyze connections far beyond regional skincare markets, positioning Pure Origins, coastal resilience, within broader conversations about business approaches to climate adaptation. The weeks following Catherine's visit unfolded with intensified purpose. My cafe hours decreased as Alan offered additional responsibility at the co-op. Recognizing my inventory management had improved efficiency enough to justify higher compensation. The arrangement provided more time for product development while maintaining income stability and community connection. Lisa arranged schedule adjustments with characteristic blend of grumbling and support. Losing my best barista to seaweed is ridiculous, but I respect the hustle. Keep the morning rush shift. Your regulars would revolt if someone else made their cappuccinos. Devon's Marine Sanctuary Incubator Program officially accepted Pure Origins, coastal resilience, providing streamlined permitting for ingredient, harvesting and technical assistance with environmental impact monitoring. The program connection established credibility with regional sustainability networks and offered potential collaboration with research institutions studying coastal adaptation strategies. Most immediately, it provided access to specialized equipment for analyzing seaweed extract properties, verification that lent scientific legitimacy to traditional harvesting knowledge. Iris proposed a structured supply relationship, offering dedicated cultivation areas for specific botanical ingredients in exchange for formulation consultation on her contemplated herbal salve line. The arrangement epitomized Cedar Cove's collaborative, economic approach. Mutually beneficial specialization rather than competitive duplication. Our complementary expertise created partnership opportunities neither could pursue independently. Her cultivation knowledge enhancing my formulation capabilities, my product development experience advancing her therapeutic applications. Consequentially, Marcus introduced me to Raymond Chen, no relation to Iris, a retired packaging engineer whose second career created custom containers from reclaimed materials. In his workshop filled with salvaged glass, sustainable woods, and experimental bioplastics, he showed prototype containers that aligned perfectly with Pure Origin's philosophical approach. Beach plastic transformed into dispensers, driftwood carved into jar lids, sea glass incorporated into bottle designs. Packaging should tell the same story as the product it contains, Raymond explained, demonstrating how each piece connected to Cedar Cove's coastal environment. The container designs resolved a significant challenge, creating distinctive packaging that communicated brand values without requiring environmentally problematic materials or prohibitive minimum orders. Raymond's small batch, locally produced approach allowed gradual scaling aligned with business growth, rather than forced expansion to meet conventional manufacturing requirements. The resulting containers would cost more per unit than mass-produced alternatives but embodied the brand's commitment to integrated sustainability. Through these evolving partnerships, Pure Origins, coastal resilience took tangible form beyond concept and sample formulations. Each relationship extended my integration into Cedar Cove's business ecosystem, creating reciprocal connections that transcended transactional arrangements. The enterprise emerging from these collaborations differed fundamentally from my Seattle operation, less focused on rapid scaling, more attentive to relational integrity and environmental embeddedness. Success metrics shifted accordingly, prioritizing sustainable profitability, ecosystem contribution, and stakeholder well-being over market dominance or investor returns. 6 weeks after Catherine's visit, with production systems established and initial inventory created, Pure Origins, coastal resilience launched formal operations. The debut occurred not through conventional marketing campaigns, but via Cedar Cove's interconnected social fabric. The co-op featured products on consignment, with in-store sampling events, Valerie's Gallery incorporated skin-friendly hand balm into the complimentary refreshment station, where visitors enjoyed local beverages while viewing exhibitions. The Tidal Basin Cafe offered testers in restrooms with information cards explaining the local ingredient sourcing. Word spread through authentic channels, personal recommendations, direct experience, community pride, and locally produced quality. Initial sales exceeded modest projections, with particular interest in the signature Tidal Recovery Serum, featuring the specialized seaweed extract. Customers responded to both product efficacy and the integrated story behind the formulations. Coastal. Ingredients harvested with sanctuary program oversight. Traditional extraction methods validated by modern analysis. Packaging created from materials reclaimed from the very beaches where ingredients were sourced. The workshop expanded operations gradually, maintaining development capabilities alongside small batch production. I hired my first employee, Kyle from the cafe, recently returned from his first semester at college with newfound interest in sustainable business practices. His part-time role managing inventory and basic production steps freed my focus for formulation refinement and business development. The arrangement reflected Cedar Cove's intergenerational knowledge transfer approach, creating meaningful employment. That complemented rather than competed with educational pursuits. As production routines stabilized and local distribution expanded to regional specialty retailers, my Seattle past resurfaced through a detailed settlement proposal from Ethan's attorneys. The terms reflected my lawyer's skillful negotiation, substantial financial compensation for surrendering the original Pure Origins trademark, and formulations, non-compete provisions limited to specific metropolitan markets, mutual non-disparagement, agreements protecting both parties' professional reputations. The document represented rational conflict resolution, translating emotional betrayal into pragmatic business dissolution. I reviewed the agreement on my apartment deck, watching fishing boats return to harbor with the day's catch. The settlement would provide significant capital for expanding production capabilities and developing additional product lines. It would legally sever remaining connections to Ethan and the business version we had influenced together. It would close the chapter that had begun at that Seattle pitch competition years earlier, acknowledging both what had been built and what had been broken beyond repair. Financial terms are favorable, my lawyer noted during our phone consultation. Original Pure Origins retained market value despite recent disruptions. Ethan's team recognizes potential legal complications from the Prenup clause activation. They're motivated to resolve quickly and cleanly. She hesitated before adding, "There's one unusual provision they've requested, a final in-person meeting. Between principals before signing. Ethan is insisting on direct conversation to achieve proper closure." The request triggered immediate wariness. Ethan had always excelled at direct persuasion. His professional success built on personal charm, deployed with tactical precision. Any face-to-face interaction created vulnerability to manipulation techniques that had proven effective during our relationship. "That's unnecessary," I responded firmly. "The legal framework provides adequate resolution without personal engagement." My lawyer agreed to reject the meeting request while proceeding with settlement finalization. The next morning, a text arrived from an unfamiliar Seattle number. "Rebecca, it's Ethan. Got your number from Zoe. We need to talk before finalizing everything. I'm flying to Portland Friday. We'll drive to Cedar Cove afterward. This deserves direct conversation rather than lawyer intermediaries. Just 1 hour. You owe me that much." The message landed like a stone in still water, ripples of anxiety disrupting carefully cultivated calm. The reference to Zoe, my college friend who'd warned about protecting what was mine before my wedding, indicated concerning boundary violations. Ethan's presumptive travel plans and claim of entitlement to my time demonstrated unchanged controlling tendencies. Most troublingly, his ability to identify my location suggested either ongoing surveillance or social engineering to extract information from shared connections. I sought counsel from Eleanor, showing her the message during our weekly dinner at the main house. Her expression remained impassive, but her eyes registered calculating assessment. "He's testing boundaries," she observed, attempting to establish dominance through presumption and implied threats. Classic power reassertion after perceived loss of control. Her analysis reflected professional experience with similar dynamics during her legal career. "How should I respond?" I asked, trusting her strategic judgment. Eleanor considered briefly before responding. "First, secure your environment. Alert Devon's security staff at the sanctuary office regarding potential unauthorized visitor. Inform Lisa and Alan about possible workplace appearance. The community should be aware without creating unnecessary drama." Her practical approach framed the situation as manageable security matter rather than emotional crisis. "Regarding direct communication," she continued, "acknowledge receipt of message but reject meeting proposal explicitly. Establish clear boundary, all communication through legal representatives only." His characterization of lawyers as intermediaries deliberately undermines professional buffer designed specifically for situations involving power imbalance. The advice reflected Eleanor's understanding of how legal structures protected vulnerable parties from manipulation through enforced procedural distance. I texted a response following her guidance. "Ethan, settlement discussions will continue through our attorneys exclusively. Do not attempt personal contact. Our legal teams have established appropriate communication channels for finalizing terms." The message established clear boundaries without engaging his specific claims or responding to emotional manipulation. I forwarded the exchange to my lawyer, who immediately sent formal communication to Ethan's legal team, reinforcing the no-contact directive and noting potential implications for settlement negotiations. The sanctuary office added temporary security protocols, with Devon assigning staff to monitor visitor access points during the threatened visit timeframe. Lisa implemented buddy systems for closing shifts at the cafe. Alan arranged inventory schedules to ensure I wouldn't work alone at the co-op. The community response demonstrated protective integration without dramatic escalation, practical support that acknowledged potential risk while maintaining proportional response. Cedar Cove's social fabric functioned as security infrastructure, creating awareness without generating paralyzing fear. Friday arrived with no sign of Ethan. Saturday passed similarly uneventful. By Sunday evening, collective vigilance had begun relaxing when Lisa called from the cafe. "He's here. Just came in asking about you. Wearing expensive hiking clothes like he's cosplaying outdoorsman. I said you don't work weekends anymore. He's lingering over espresso, checking his phone repeatedly. Thought you should know." My pulse quickened, despite mental preparation. Eleanor's voice echoed in memory. "Anticipate, then neutralize. Don't react, respond." I called Devon, who immediately dispatched sanctuary staff to maintain unobtrusive presence near the cafe. Marcus offered to drive into town, providing trusted support without escalating confrontation. I declined his specific assistance, but accepted his suggestion to activate community resources rather than isolate in fear. "Text Valerie," he advised. "Sunday evening photography walk meets at the gallery in 20 minutes. Public group activity provides safety through witnesses while demonstrating community integration." The photography walk represented perfect strategic response, scheduled public activity occurring in monitored space, populated by locals familiar with my situation, moving through well-trafficked areas with multiple exit options. Participation would signal neither hiding in fear nor reckless confrontation. I texted Valerie, who immediately confirmed my welcome addition to the regular event. Within 30 minutes, I joined 8 photography enthusiasts gathering outside the gallery, cameras slung around necks and conversation flowing naturally about evening light conditions. We proceeded along the harbor walkway, stopping periodically for Valerie's technical suggestions about capturing reflections on water or framing architectural elements against sunset sky. The activity provided genuine distraction through creative engagement while maintaining situational awareness. Halfway through the planned route, movement at cafe's outdoor seating area caught my attention. Ethan rising from table as our group approached, his practiced smile forming as recognition. Registered. "Rebecca!" His voice carried artificial warmth across the diminishing distance between us. "What a coincidence. I've been trying to reach you." The performance played to potential witnesses, reasonable ex-husband seeking civilized conversation rather than boundary-violating pursuer ignoring explicit rejection of contact. His appearance had been calculated for the environment. Casual outdoor apparel rather than his customary business attire. Relaxed demeanor suggesting spontaneous encounter rather than deliberate tracking. Valerie stepped subtly closer to my side, her photographer's body positioning creating slight barrier without obvious intervention. Other walk participants maintained natural movement patterns while glancing between us with informed curiosity. Ethan registered the group dynamic, reassessing his approach with visible recalculation. "Could we speak privately for a few minutes?" he asked, modulating his voice to project reasonable request rather than demand, "just to finalize a few settlement details personally." "Our attorneys are handling all settlement communications," I replied, voice steady despite accelerated heartbeat. As I stated clearly in my message, any contact should occur through proper channels. The response maintained boundary without escalation, neither fleeing nor engaging beyond necessary minimum. Ethan's expression tightened slightly, the practiced smile becoming fixed rather than fluid. His strategy required my participation in fabricated civility, my acceptance of pretense that our interaction constituted appropriate communication rather than deliberate boundary violation. "This is ridiculous, Rebecca," he said, voice dropping to intended intimacy that nevertheless remained audible to nearby witnesses. "We were married for years. Surely we can have a simple conversation without lawyers present. I've flown all this way to resolve things amicably." His framing deliberately mischaracterized the situation, reasonable pursuit of amicable resolution rather than explicit disregard for clearly communicated boundaries. The manipulation technique was familiar from our marriage, redefining reality to position his desires as reasonable while portraying my boundaries as irrational. "You've received clear communication through appropriate channels," I stated, maintaining eye contact without emotional engagement. "This conversation is finished. Please respect the process our legal representatives have established." I turned to Valerie, indicating readiness to continue the photography walk. She nodded, addressing the group with professional composure. "Let's continue toward the lighthouse point. The rock formations create interesting shadow patterns just before sunset." As we moved away, Ethan called after us. "You've changed, Rebecca. The woman I married would never have been so cold." The statement contained unintended truth that strengthened rather than undermined my resolve. I had indeed changed. Developed boundaries his controlling behavior had gradually eroded during our relationship. Reclaimed agency his manipulation had systematically undermined established identity independent of his approval or validation. The transformation he identified as negative divergence represented essential positive evolution. The photography walk continued without further incident, conversation gradually returning to technical aspects of sunset capture. Several participants positioned themselves unobtrusively between me and the cafe's direction without explicit coordination. Intuitive formation providing protection through collective presence. When the group dispersed near the gallery, Valerie and two others accompanied me to my car, maintaining casual conversation about upcoming exhibits while ensuring safe departure. "You handled that perfectly," Valerie commented as I prepared to drive home. Calm, clear, brief. Exactly the right approach with boundary violators. Her matter-of-fact assessment normalized the experience, treating Ethan's appearance as manageable security situation rather than relationship drama. "Text when you're safely home. I'll alert Devin that our visitor has been sighted in town." The exchange reflected Cedar Cove's integrated support system, practical assistance without excessive emotional processing. Driving the coastal road toward the Washington's property, I experienced surprising emotional clarity rather than anticipated distress. The brief encounter had confirmed complete dissonance between Ethan's reality construction and my lived experience. His continued expectation of compliance with his preferences despite explicit boundary setting. His assumption that physical presence would override clearly communicated limits. His belief that emotional manipulation would supersede logical consequences. The interaction revealed not just unchanged controlling behavior, but fundamental failure to recognize my transformation. Eleanor waited on her porch despite the evening chill, Marcus visible through windows preparing tea inside. I provided brief, factual account of the encounter, describing Ethan's approach and my response without embellishment or interpretation. Eleanor listened attentively, asking clarifying questions about specific language and behavioral cues. Her analytical approach helped maintain objective perspective rather than emotional reaction, framing the incident as information rather than trauma. "You successfully disrupted his script," she observed when I finished reporting. "His strategy required your participation in pretense of reasonable interaction. By maintaining boundary without escalation, you denied necessary engagement for manipulation effectiveness." Her assessment validated my instinctive response while identifying strategic implications. He'll likely attempt revised approach rather than immediately abandoning objective. Continued community awareness remains advisable. Eleanor's prediction proved accurate the following morning when Alan called from the co-op. "Your ex is here shopping, examining Pure Origin's display with exaggerated interest, clearly waiting for you to arrive for shift." The report indicated Ethan's tactical adjustment, positioning himself as customer in spaces where I worked, creating situations where professional responsibilities might override personal boundaries. The approach exploited dual roles I occupied in Cedar Cove's business community, potentially forcing engagement through workplace obligations. "I'll cover your shift," Alan continued, anticipating my concern. "Stock verification can wait until tomorrow. Stay away from town today." His practical solution reflected Cedar Cove's adaptive support without dramatic disruption. Minor schedule adjustments maintaining business operations while creating protective distance. Similar messages arrived from Lisa regarding cafe shifts and Devin about scheduled sanctuary office meetings, each proposing reasonable accommodations without excessive reaction. The community response demonstrated remarkable balance, taking the situation seriously without escalating beyond appropriate proportion. By mid-afternoon, reports indicated Ethan had visited multiple Cedar Cove establishments featuring Pure Origin's products: the gallery, the cafe, the co-op, 2 boutiques carrying the line. At each location, he engaged proprietors in conversation about the brand, sometimes identifying himself as my husband, other times presenting as interested industry professional. The pattern suggested methodical information gathering rather than emotional pursuit, professional assessment rather than personal reconciliation attempt. The behavior shift triggered reassessment of his objectives. Initial assumption that Ethan sought psychological dominance through forced personal interaction appeared incomplete given his systematic business intelligence collection. His comprehensive survey of distribution partners, product placement, pricing structures, and local reception suggested commercial analysis rather than relationship closure. The realization prompted call to my lawyer, sharing newly observed pattern and requesting settlement examination for potential vulnerabilities. The non-compete territorial restrictions, she identified immediately. Current language specifies metropolitan markets where original Pure Origins operated. If Cedar Cove formulations prove commercially viable, he could potentially develop competing products for this market segment, while you remain restricted from re-entering Seattle territory with new formulations. The oversight had seemed inconsequential during initial settlement drafting, when Cedar Cove represented temporary refuge rather than permanent business location. With Pure Origins, coastal resilience demonstrating commercial viability, The limitation created significant vulnerability. He's assessing whether your new direction threatens potential expansion of his version of pure origins, my lawyer continued, analytical skills translating observed behavior into strategic interpretation. The settlement needs revision to provide mutual market protection. I'll draft expanded territorial exclusivity language preventing either party from entering the other's current or reasonably anticipated market regions with competing skincare products. The solution addressed underlying commercial threat rather than merely responding to immediate boundary violation. That evening, my lawyer confirmed Ethan had departed Cedar Cove, returning to Portland for scheduled flight to Seattle. His reconnaissance, completed without achieving forced direct interaction, he had apparently determined further pursuit unproductive given community awareness and coordinated protective response. The physical threat receded, but the experience illuminated evolving challenges requiring appropriate adaptation, exactly the resilience principle at the core of my reformulated business approach. The settlement revision process extended negotiations. Another month, the delay ultimately beneficial as expanded territorial protections strengthened long-term security for both business versions. The final agreement included substantial financial compensation, mutual market exclusivity, with clear geographical boundaries, and professional no-contact provisions with explicit enforcement mechanisms. When fully executed documents arrived, for final signature, they represented not just business dissolution but comprehensive disentanglement, legal structures supporting emotional and professional separation. The financial implications transformed Pure Origins. Coastal Resilience's trajectory. Settlement funds provided capital for expanded production capacity, additional formulation equipment, and marketing development beyond Cedar Cove's immediate region. Devon's Sanctuary program connected the business to wider coastal community networks, creating distribution opportunities in similar environmentally conscious markets throughout the Pacific Northwest. Catherine's feature article, published as Negotiations Concluded, positioned the brand within emerging regenerative business conversations, attracting attention from specialty retailers aligned with sustainability values. Expansion necessitated graduation from boathouse workshop to dedicated production facility, a converted fishing warehouse at the harbor's edge with appropriate zoning for light manufacturing. The space accommodated small batch production while maintaining formulation laboratory and ingredient processing areas, allowing controlled growth without compromising quality standards. Kyle transitioned from part-time assistant to full-time production manager, his business program studies complementing practical experience in sustainable manufacturing processes. 2 additional employees joined the operation, a local herbalist managing ingredient sourcing, and a recent college graduate coordinating distribution logistics. The business structure that emerged reflected Cedar Cove's collaborative economic model rather than conventional corporate hierarchy. Decision-making incorporated input from both employees and supply partners through quarterly planning sessions addressing seasonal harvesting variations, production capabilities, and market developments. Profit-sharing mechanisms distributed, gains proportionally among contributors to the enterprise ecosystem. Growth planning prioritized sustainable prosperity over maximization strategies, focusing on appropriate scaling aligned with environmental capacity and community benefit. 10 months after arriving in Cedar Cove with nothing but emergency cash and formulation notebooks, I stood on the deck of my newly purchased cottage overlooking the bay, watching autumn storm clouds gather over the horizon. The property, a modest but sturdy structure with attached studio space, represented not just financial recovery but genuine belonging. The settlement funds had facilitated purchase without depleting business capital, creating separation between personal security and enterprise development that my Seattle life had gradually eroded. The woman who had fled Seattle in crisis had undergone transformation as profound as the business she'd rebuilt. Professional identity had shifted from growth-oriented entrepreneur to regenerative enterprise steward. Social integration had evolved from strategic networking to authentic community membership. Personal boundaries had developed from reactive protection to proactive definition. Even physical appearance had changed. Designer wardrobe replaced by practical coastal attire. High-maintenance styling yielded to weather-appropriate simplicity. Tensed vigilance relaxed into grounded presence. Eleanor and Marcus joined me on the deck, bringing housewarming gifts reflecting their practical character. A weather station for monitoring atmospheric conditions affecting harvesting timing, regional field guides for coastal plant identification, a vintage barometer whose brass fittings complemented the cottage's existing hardware. Their presence represented not just neighborly connection, but meaningful mentorship that had guided transition from emergency survival to purposeful rebuilding. The relationship had gradually evolved from landlord-tenant formality to intergenerational knowledge transfer to emerging friendship. "Proper anchoring," Marcus commented, surveying the property with evident approval. A business requires geographical rootedness for sustainable operation. Mobile enterprises struggle to maintain genuine ecological integration. His observation applied equally to business foundations and personal grounding, both requiring stable connection to place for authentic development rather than superficial adaptation. The cottage purchase represented commitment to Cedar Cove as home rather than temporary refuge, acceptance of the community as chosen rather than circumstantial belonging. The settlement implementation appears satisfactory, Eleanor noted. Architectural. Precision framing personal assessment. Clean disentanglement with appropriate protections against future entanglements. Financial compensation without lingering obligations. Territorial boundaries with mutual enforcement mechanisms. Her summary addressed not just legal resolution but comprehensive liberation, frameworks establishing independence at multiple levels. The settlement had translated messy emotional betrayal into structured separation, converting relationship dissolution into business transaction with clearly defined parameters. As they departed, leaving me to continue unpacking in my new home, Eleanor paused at the doorway with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Transformation isn't linear," she observed, rare personal insight offered without specific prompting. "There will be unexpected recurrences of former patterns requiring renewed attention. The work continues beyond initial reconstruction." The comment acknowledged ongoing nature of recovery, not single triumphant moment, but continuous process requiring sustained awareness and intentional development. That evening, I stood in the cottage's small kitchen unpacking dishes when my phone chimed with text notification. The number displayed belonged to my Seattle lawyer. "Final confirmation. Settlement funds transferred to your account today. All documentation properly filed. Matter officially closed." The message represented formal conclusion to legal proceedings that had structured the past year's transition, from charity gala confrontation to Cedar Cove reinvention to comprehensive resolution. I stepped onto the cottage's deck, breathing salt air tinged with approaching rain. Fishing boats returned to harbor ahead of the coming storm, their navigation lights creating moving constellations against darkening sky. The scene embodied the resilience principles I'd incorporated into both business reformulation and personal reconstruction. Recognition of approaching challenges, appropriate preparation without exaggerated fear, calculated risk balanced with protective measures, adaptability sustained through community connection. The woman who had once defined success through external validation and material acquisition now measured value differently, through alignment of personal and professional purpose, through meaningful integration within community ecosystem, through capacity to navigate disruption without fundamental damage to essential self. The transformation hadn't erased vulnerability or eliminated future challenges, but had developed internal and external resources for meeting difficulties with grounded response rather than reactive fear. Storm clouds continued gathering offshore, their dramatic formations illuminated by setting sun. The approaching weather system represented neither threat nor inconvenience. but natural cycle requiring appropriate preparation and realistic respect. Like the coastal ecosystems that inspired my reformulated products, resilience emerged not from avoiding disturbance, but from developing capacity to absorb disruption while maintaining essential function. The understanding applied equally to personal recovery, business development, and community sustainability, interconnected systems sharing fundamental principles of adaptive integrity. I raised imaginary glass toward the advancing storm clouds. Silent toast acknowledging journey from that wine-splashed charity gala to this moment of grounded presence. The Prenup activation code texted from a ladies' room stall had indeed changed everything. Not through financial protection alone, but through catalyst effect that forced fundamental reassessment of what truly constituted value, success, security, and belonging. The transformation continued beyond this moment of apparent completion, an ongoing process of discovery rather than fixed destination. Exactly as Eleanor had observed with characteristic perception. Rain began falling as twilight deepened into evening darkness. I remained on the deck, letting weather wash over me without retreat, experiencing natural intensity without unnecessary resistance. The storm's approach mirrored life's inevitable challenges, sometimes visible on distant horizon allowing preparation, sometimes arriving without warning requiring immediate adaptation. Either circumstance could be navigated with the resilience I'd cultivated through this year of reconstruction, capacity to bend without breaking, to absorb disruption without losing essential integrity, to emerge from difficulty with deeper awareness rather than diminished capability. The Prenup activation code had indeed changed everything, but not in ways Ethan could possibly have anticipated when dismissing the clause as boilerplate, requiring only casual acknowledgement. The protection mechanism designed for worst-case scenario had ultimately facilitated best possible outcome, not just preserving assets, but catalyzing reconstruction of identity, purpose, and belonging. The journey from wine-stained humiliation to coastal regeneration had transformed disaster into opportunity, betrayal into liberation, ending into beginning. Whatever storms approached on future horizons would be met with hard-earned resilience, grounded presence, and the quiet certainty that adaptation represented not defeat, but intelligence expressing itself through changed circumstances. 2 years. To the day since the wine-throwing incident at the Barrett Foundation Gala, I stood behind a sleek counter in my flagship store in downtown Cedar Cove, wrapping a gift set of coastal resilience products for a customer who had driven 3 hours from Portland specifically to visit. The woman, a corporate attorney with immaculately manicured hands, examined the tidal recovery serum with professional scrutiny. "I read about your company in that business quarterly," she said, watching me arrange products in recycled paper. The resilience concept resonated with me. 20 years in corporate law teaches you about weathering storms. Her knowing smile suggested familiarity with professional turbulence. I nodded, recognizing the unspoken understanding between women who had navigated challenging environments. "The storm metaphor isn't just marketing," I replied, securing the package with twine made from invasive beach grass harvested through the sanctuary program. Every ingredient is selected for properties developed through environmental adaptation. Plants that thrive despite harsh conditions produce compounds with exceptional protective qualities. The explanation represented both product truth and personal philosophy, value emerging from successfully navigated difficulty rather than avoided challenge. As she departed with her purchases, Catherine Monroe entered, no longer just the journalist who had featured Pure Origins in Northwest, Entrepreneur Quarterly, but now a friend who regularly visited Cedar Cove. Her article had generated attention far beyond regional business circles, positioning the brand within emerging conversations about regenerative enterprise models. The resulting expansion had transformed Pure Origins, coastal resilience from niche local operation to recognized leader in sustainable skincare innovation. "Ready for tomorrow?" Catherine asked, referring to the event that had occupied much of my planning attention for months. Pure Origins would host the first Coastal Resilience Symposium, gathering scientists, business leaders, and environmental advocates to discuss economic models that supported rather than extracted from natural systems. The concept had evolved from casual conversations with Devin and Iris into structured knowledge exchange featuring participants from throughout the Pacific Northwest. As ready as possible, I admitted, locking the shop's register as closing time approached. Marcus is reviewing my opening remarks tonight. Eleanor has triple-checked the legal language in the collaborative research agreements. The workshop space is prepared for demonstrations. The event represented significant evolution in my professional identity, from product creator to thought leader in business approaches to environmental adaptation, from individual entrepreneur to community catalyst. Catherine nodded approvingly. This symposium perfectly demonstrates what made your story compelling beyond skincare. It's about transforming disruption into regenerative opportunity. Her journalistic instinct had identified the universal elements in my particular journey, connecting personal resilience to broader economic and ecological adaptation principles. The symposium would explore these connections explicitly through presentations, panels, and collaborative workshops hosted in Pure Origin's expanded facilities. After Catherine departed, I completed closing procedures with May, the shop manager who had joined the team 6 months earlier. The business now employed 8 people: production staff, research specialists, retail associates, all Cedar Cove residents receiving living wages with profit-sharing arrangements. The organizational structure reflected values developed during rebuilding rather than conventional corporate hierarchies, collaborative decision-making, transparent operations, integrated environmental monitoring, community reciprocity. Walking toward home along the harbor pathway, I passed landmarks that charted my Cedar Cove journey. The cafe where I'd served morning cappuccinos, the co-op where I'd managed inventory, the community booth where I'd first presented Coastal Resilience products. Each location represented a stage in transformation from shell-shocked survivor to integrated community member. The progression hadn't followed clean, linear trajectory, but rather spiral development, revisiting similar challenges with incrementally improved capacity. Occasional regression followed by deeper integration. My cottage welcomed me with familiar comfort, modest but sufficient, practical yet personal. The structure itself embodied Cedar Cove's influence on my evolving values: quality over extravagance, functionality over impression, authentic character over prescribed perfection. Unlike the designer showcase condo Ethan and I had occupied in Seattle, this space contained nothing maintained solely for appearance or status. Each element served genuine purpose or provided meaningful pleasure rather than projecting calculated image. Eleanor and Marcus arrived for our scheduled dinner carrying contribution typical of their practical generosity: fresh herbs from their garden, local wine from a vineyard they'd supported since its establishment, Marcus's exceptional sourdough bread. Our relationship had evolved from landlords and tenant, to mentors and protege, to genuine friendship marked by mutual respect. They had guided critical transitions without creating dependency, offered wisdom without imposing solutions, provided protection without limiting growth. The symposium preparations appear complete, Eleanor noted, arranging herbs for table centerpiece, with characteristic precision. Contractual frameworks appropriately structured for knowledge exchange without intellectual property complications. Her attention to legal fundamentals had protected Pure Origins through expansion, preventing complications that might have derailed growth without proper structural foundation. Her mentorship had taught me to value thorough preparation without succumbing to paralysis through over-analysis. The presentation flow works well, Marcus added, uncorking wine with practiced ease. Opening with personal journey provides context for larger principles, then transitioning to practical applications through case studies. Effective knowledge transfer structure. His guidance had helped develop my public speaking capacity from Nervous product demonstrations to confident thought leadership. The symposium represented significant expansion of comfort boundaries, from individual entrepreneur to convener of collective wisdom. Dinner conversation flowed comfortably between symposium logistics, business developments, and community matters. The relationship had balanced over time, initially weighted toward their guidance of my rebuilding, gradually equalizing as my contributions to Cedar Cove increased through business establishment, evolving toward reciprocal exchange between peers with complementary expertise. The transition reflected healthy mentorship progression, protective support, yielding to collaborative engagement as capacity developed. "We received interesting correspondence today," Eleanor mentioned as we cleared dinner dishes. Her tone maintained neutralness that nevertheless conveyed significance. Seattle business publication requested interview regarding Pure Origins. Expansion success and regenerative model implementation. Specifically mentioned interest in origin story involving prenuptial agreement protection mechanism activation. The comment landed with surprising emotional neutrality. 2 years earlier, such direct reference to the wine-throwing incident would have triggered immediate stress response, accelerated heartbeat, constricted breathing, hypervigilance. The reaction's absence demonstrated genuine recovery rather than mere adaptation, transformation at physiological level rather than simply behavioral management. The event that had catalyzed my Cedar Cove journey now registered as historical fact rather than active wound. Interesting timing with the symposium, I observed, considering implications while washing dishes alongside Marcus. The prenup story provides compelling narrative hook, but risks reducing complex business philosophy to dramatic personal anecdote. The concern reflected evolved professional identity, emphasis on regenerative principles rather than individual experience, focus on methodology rather than personality. Pure Origins had developed beyond recovery story into substantive implementation of sustainable enterprise model. All profound innovations contain personal dimensions, Marcus noted. Drying plates with methodical thoroughness. Pretending otherwise creates artificial separation between business operations and human experience. Integration represents authenticity rather than inappropriate disclosure. His perspective highlighted false dichotomy between professional principles and personal motivation. Arbitrary boundary maintained through corporate convention rather than functional necessity. Eleanor nodded agreement. The prenuptial mechanism enabled reconstruction by providing essential safety. That factual connection illuminates how formal protections facilitate innovation through risk mitigation. Her framing positioned the wine-throwing incident and subsequent legal activation within broader context of structural supports necessary for vulnerable transitions. The perspective transformed potentially sensationalistic element into substantive educational opportunity. The discussion continued on my cottage deck, where we watched moonlight illuminate incoming tide, rhythmic advance and retreat, demonstrating natural cycles of renewal. The conversation explored potential approaches to interview request, frameworks, for discussing personal catalyst within professional context, methods for highlighting systemic implications without overemphasizing individual drama, strategies for maintaining privacy boundaries while acknowledging transformation journey. The decision remains entirely yours, Eleanor emphasized as they prepared to depart. Disclosure boundaries are personal sovereignty, expressions requiring neither justification nor explanation. Her statement reaffirmed fundamental principles she had demonstrated repeatedly throughout our relationship: genuine support without imposed expectation, guidance without control, influence without manipulation. The autonomy she consistently protected had enabled reconstruction of identity and purpose based on internal navigation rather than external definition. Alone on the deck after their departure, I considered how completely circumstances had transformed since that disastrous gala night. The terrified woman fleeing Seattle with emergency cash and formulation notebooks had evolved into established business owner hosting scientific symposium. The individual seeking basic survival had developed into community contributor creating employment opportunities. The betrayed spouse had reconstructed identity independent of relationship status or external validation. Most significantly, the perspective through which I processed experience had fundamentally shifted, from control orientation toward adaptation capacity, from resistance against disruption toward integration of challenge, from fixed identity protection toward continuous regenerative development. The transformation hadn't eliminated vulnerability or prevented difficulties, but had cultivated response capacity that converted obstacles into growth catalysts rather than devastating setbacks. The following morning, preparing for symposium opening, I crafted response to the interview request, agreeing to discussion that would include prenuptial activation story within broader context of business regeneration principles. The decision represented neither reckless disclosure nor fearful avoidance, but calibrated transparency serving educational purpose. The wine-throwing incident had catalyzed personally significant transformation, with potentially valuable applications beyond individual experience. Standing before symposium participants hours later, scientists, entrepreneurs, environment advocates, community leaders, I began presentation with direct acknowledgement. Pure origins, coastal resilience developed from personal disruption, transformed. Through ecological principles. When my husband threw wine in my face for refusing to surrender my company, a prenuptial agreement protection mechanism activated, providing essential security that enabled complete reconstruction. The statement established factual foundation without emotional dramatization. That experience demonstrated how formal safeguards can create protected space for vulnerable transitions, a principle equally applicable to business structures, community systems, and ecological restoration projects. The framework positioned personal experience as case study illustrating broader application potential rather than mere biographical detail or cautionary tale. The Prenup activation code I texted that night changed everything. Not merely through asset protection, but by catalyzing fundamental reassessment of success metrics, relationship structures, and environmental integration. The resulting enterprise, developed not despite disruption, but through transformation of challenge into regenerative opportunity. The conclusion connected individual experience to collective principles being explored throughout the symposium, vulnerability conversion, into adaptation capacity, disruption transformation into renewal catalyst, protection mechanisms enabling innovation potential. As discussion unfolded among participants, exploring applications from coastal ecosystem management to community economic development, I experienced profound integration of personal journey with professional purpose. The Prenup activation that had initially represented desperate emergency measure had ultimately facilitated comprehensive reconstruction, psychological independence, professional innovation, community integration, environmental stewardship. The protection mechanism had enabled not just recovery, but renaissance, not just survival, but substantive contribution. Cedar Cove stretched below the conference center windows, harbor reflecting morning light, businesses beginning daily operations, sanctuary areas preserved for future generations. The community that had initially provided emergency refuge had ultimately become chosen home, the place where authentic identity and purpose had developed through meaningful integration rather than strategic positioning. The transformation represented not restoration of what existed before betrayal, but creation of something fundamentally stronger, more genuine, more sustainable. The Prenup activation code had indeed changed everything, not through simple financial protection alone, but through catalyst effect triggering comprehensive reassessment of what constituted genuine value, meaningful success, authentic relationship. The knowledge gained through reconstruction now served wider purpose, methodologies shared with symposium participants, employment created for community members, regenerative principles embodied through business operations. The private protection mechanism had ultimately facilitated public contribution beyond anything imaginable during that devastating gala night. 2 years after the wine had stained my white silk blouse, I stood before colleagues and community members not as victim of betrayal but as developer of regenerative enterprise model, not as woman who had lost everything but as innovator who had discovered more authentic purpose. The transformation journey continued beyond this moment of apparent arrival, spiraling development rather than linear progression, continuous adaptation rather than fixed destination. The Prenup activation code had indeed changed everything, creating protected space where genuine resilience could develop, capacity not just to recover from storms, but to transform their energy into unexpected renewal, previously unimagined. Growth, profoundly integrated purpose. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.